Welcome AI community with no borders, and let me start by thanking you all for the unwavering support you give us. Your belief in us drives us. Can you imagine that this time we reached 2,923 registered AI enthusiasts from across over 90 countries? It's not about a number I'm stunned about. It's about how many people across different countries and cultures are interested in learning more about the potential of these cognitive technologies, sharing and understanding, and most importantly, discussing our responsibilities that comes with these new technologies. As I always love to say, it's all about human and technology, how we can augment the human being and make our lives more secure, healthier, easier, and more pleasant, focusing on our core competences. I want to encourage you to use the chat and connect with your AI peers globally. A lot of you thanked us for having virtually met like-minded people or beneficial business contacts through our platform. Feel free to share your thoughts, comments, and LinkedIn links to build further fruitful partnerships. Share in the chat where you are joining us from, showing the world our strengths as we work together to build a global and responsible AI community. Let me now kick off today's CognitiveVirtual about responsible AI and imperative. We all know corporate social responsibility is nothing new. Practices and advancements for both business and societies need to be aligned. With the rapid development of cognitive technologies, corporate social responsibility has been joined by technology social responsibility, resulting in an increasing set of challenges for businesses. In the next 3 hours, global AI experts and leaders will share how to put principles into actions, how to walk the talk and develop our emerging technology to our best benefit, both for business and society. It is an absolute imperative that the private and public sector work together and with joint forces consciously aligned between short and mid-term business goals and long-term society ones. The focus of our three major experts' discussion on responsible AI will be around key principle of ethical AI and why talk about it, the global landscape, perspectives of society, regulations and businesses, the fundamental and components, and hands-on insights and practice, which has been very important for us since the beginning, to talk about practical insights and not hocus pocus. So why wait? Act now and enjoy an insightful event starting with our opening keynote about ethical AI by our dear friend Sylvain Duranton. Sylvain, you are the global leader of BCG Gamma, a unit dedicated to applying data science and advanced analytics to business. You manage a team of over 1,500 data scientists and have implemented more than 50 custom AI and analytics solutions for companies across the globe. You're also a founder of the BCG Global Pricing Practice. Over time, you specialize in transformation, organization, change management, and marketing and sales topics. Sylvain, please kick off today's CognitiveVirtual. The stage is yours.
Thank you, Dalit, and thank you all for joining. On this topic of responsible AI, I think the message is pretty clear. You said it, Dalit, it's an imperative. Companies need to start investing ASAP, and this is not just about investing money, but there's a lot of rolling up the sleeves to get things done, because it means lots of changes in internal processes and in deploying new tools. And on this topic of responsible AI, I welcome the fact that the EU has issued its draft regulation on responsible AI, because I think it will help restore the confidence between the general public and AI by putting some light on the topic, by reassuring people, because I feel the general public has been made too scared about AI, and a lot of the noise in the media that we could see made people think that, AI might be even coding algos or running AI might be even more dangerous than operating a nuclear plant at some point. And it's important that, with the rise of this responsible AI topic and with the noise that will be on the regulation, the narratives in companies, in the general public needs to be very clear to first emphasize the benefits of AI. And in a nutshell, the benefits is reducing wastes, any kind of waste, by better forecast. And anyone can benefit from that. It's about having, less useless inventory in the supply chain, less useless travel in logistics things, less useless emails, less bad treatment or healthcare protocol for patients. It's less useless capex to try to adapt the world to climate change. Many very important topics which are powered by AI. And I think that's the first thing to do when starting to talk on responsible AI. Now, the EU regulation, probably a bit like what happened with GDPR, will be setting some sort of standard that will be reused, mirrored more or less in other jurisdictions. And I think this regulation is quite innovative and bringing some very good news. And the first one is that the regulation is application-driven, not technology-driven. And the EU has set a number of forbidden use cases and some high-risk use cases. I'm not trying to say whether ML or facial recognition or DL is good or bad, but really focusing on application, which is exactly the way I think companies and everyone should be thinking about responsible AI and how to deal with AI. Then the other good aspect I feel of this regulation, which is also a strong signal for all companies, is that responsible AI is not all about ethics. Of course, ethics matters. Of course, trying to understand what is the intent behind an algo is super important, and there can be gray situations, there can be ill-intentioned algorithms, and that's very important that this part is covered by the law. But the law is also putting lots of emphasis on the robustness of what is being developed, which I think is of utmost importance. And most of the issues we are getting with AI are not so much on ethics. Yes, we have ill-intentioned people, but mostly on the robustness of what is being developed. And that's another aspect I welcome a lot, and that any companies anywhere in the world needs to have in mind when they want to work on responsible AI. Then, of course, like any responsible AI process, the regulation bears its own risk. And I see two main risks. The first one is gray zones. The way AI is described by the law is super broad. You have machine learning, of course, but you have stats, you even have optimization in the plot. So it's a very broad and large definition of AI. And when talking about the 26 high-risk use cases, some are pretty clear when dealing with, justice system, for instance. Others could be in a gray zone, and everything related to HR is super regulated, which is understandable. But there are some usage of AI in HR, to try to know what trainings to propose to different people, which are super important. And we need regulators to make sure that they will not stop some of the harmless, easy, useful AI engines, with the regulation. The other risk is making the whole thing too heavy and too bureaucratic. Of course, one needs special care when dealing with high risk use cases, but there will be a registration process, at least in the law as it is now, to a newly created agency in Europe. We need to make sure that we will not be stopping innovation and action in the field of AI because of with this new regulation. Beyond the regulation and the risk that regulators need to be aware of, not to stop the innovation and all the excitement around and activity around AI, what does that mean for companies? I think for companies, the EU regulation is a big wake-up call for everyone who has not started to work hard on winning a sort of building maybe a better world, winning a social license to use AI and proving that they manage AI in a very responsible way. And this is not just about complying with regulation. I think regulation will set some sort of minimum standard, a sort of minimum table stakes for everyone, depending on the use cases, to be responsible. But regulation will never be able to embrace the full complexity of the many applications across sectors that can take place. And that will be in the hands of companies. And for companies, it will be very important to go beyond the regulation to make sure that trust is built with consumers, because there will be more and more scrutiny on, do you have this social license to use AI? And I see around the world, activists scrutinizing what companies are doing. I see consortium or different bodies starting to propose certification services. And I'm convinced that in the end, successful company will do a better job than others in terms of proving to everyone that they deal with AI in a very responsible way. And that's a big task, because on the what, everyone agrees. And if you take the many over 60 frameworks for responsible AI, which have been defined all around the world by different bodies, they all touch on the same topics: accountability, transparency, ethics, whatnot. And the EU regulation is just also tapping in those exact same buckets. But the main question will be the how and the what. And the how and the what is big. It's not just about setting a responsible AI committee at the top of a company. Moving towards responsible AI is about deploying new tools to archive data sets which are being used, to document code in a meaningful way, tools to assess, is there a socio-economic risk on the algos or the use case we are doing, or an ethical risk? Tools to test algos and protocol to test algos to make sure that the people who build the algos are different and the accountabilities are separate with people who test. And companies need to think through, what does testing mean for us? What are the protocols we want to use? So these are it's a massive change. It's close to a reset in the way many companies are dealing with AI in their day-to-day work, bringing transparency, using tools to bring transparency into what is being done. How do you define transparency? Okay? And that requires really changing the way the full data science team is working with business teams. And that's why I'm saying it's a major endeavor, and that companies need to start taking this endeavor very seriously. One other critical topic, which is mentioned in the EU regulation, is human oversight. Human oversight is mandatory on high-risk use cases. But, companies need to go much further than human oversights. And best practice companies, they have codified different archetypes on how humans and AI can work together to make sure that they deploy the best human-AI relationships throughout the company. So it's a very important task that companies need to do. I am hopeful that companies will follow that track, because in our latest BCG Gamma survey on responsible AI, we surveyed more than 2,000 companies. More than 60% of companies active in responsible AI do that because they see a business imperative and a customer benefit of working on that. And just few of them really do that as a primary concern for compliance or risk management. So there's a will which is here. Then the bad news, in a way, is that 55% of companies, it's evidence in that survey, do massively overestimate how good they do vis-a-vis responsible AI. And they need to realize that, having that committee at the top is not enough, and they need to, deploy all these changes in their process and ways of working and new tools to make sure that what they do is responsible. That's a big investment, and I think it's the best investment companies can do in the field of AI right now. And it's probably a much bigger bang for the buck than an extra 10 data scientists or a few new license on funky technologies, because it's the very foundation of what they do in AI, which is at stake here. And no one will be successful without this social license to deploy AI to its customers or consumers.
Thanks a lot, Sylvain. For me, it's always great to listen to you, to your expertise and your great experience. And it's a great honor to have someone like you, an AI global thought leader, sharing this with our audience. Actually, I put down 2 pages of notes to summarize the takeaways, and I will come down to only one before we go to the questions. What you mentioned about the survey is that actually 60% of the companies are dealing already with responsible AI and are aware of that, and so on and so forth. And on the other hand, you mentioned that kind of the downside is that we know that 55% are overestimating themselves. But what I think, and this is a very important step, that we are aware that there is a problem. And I think this is a first positive step that we can now build together strong partnerships with strong partners like you guys, where we can leverage each other and scale up this topic of responsible AI. And especially being aware, and this still I have to bring another takeaway that I really liked what you said. It's not only about the ethical aspects, there is much, much more into it. But Hey, guys out there, we're going to summarize all the takeaways, as you know, always, and send it to you in the wrap up. There was a lot of insightful information in this really short 7 minutes, Sylvain. I would like to come up with one question from the audience. I have to read it from my WhatsApp. How do you evaluate the EU initiative around responsible AI in the light of the competitiveness of European organizations versus China and the US?
It's a real topic, and it will depend on how strict the regulator will be on defining what high-risk use cases are. If we end up with social scoring through facial recognition, as we have in China, being forbidden, and very few use cases deemed high risk, I think the regulation can play and can really help Europe. If all of a sudden, because of bureaucracy or excessive scrutiny, we end up with 20% of what is being done in AI falling into the high-risk category, then we have a big problems. That's why I was saying I think the regulation can help, provided we avoid too much uncertainty for operators in terms of what's allowed high risk or not, and that we don't create too much of a bureaucratic process that would stifle all our efforts in Europe regarding AI.
Great, thanks a lot. We have even time for a second question, and all the others, please reach out to Sylvain directly via LinkedIn. I'm sure he will be more than happy to share his experience. The second question is, if there is no real demand from users for responsible AI, why do companies invest money to implement more process tools and rules? In this case, how can we make users aware of the risk?
So, building upon what Dalit was saying about the 62%, 62% of companies are convinced that there's a business benefit and a customer benefit to deploy responsible AI. And I think this is because the awareness of the general public is increasing by the day. And you see lots of certification initiatives where people want to create responsible AI labels, and some activists are communicating a lot on the risk of related to AI. The press has commented, many issues regarding responsible AI. And I'm convinced that today the general public is really looking for solutions that will protect their own interest. Business has understood that, and that's the business case behind the investment I was talking about. But I see many sectors where it's a massive difference. You're in a bank, or you are a retailer, and you want to do some personalization to your customers. People need to trust you, and the reason why Apple has stopped some of the use of personal data long ago, and is now being followed by other big tech players in terms of fair usage of personal data and suppressing basically many of the cookies, is showing that there is a cost to do that for those companies, but they see a bigger benefit in terms of trust. Trust will be the name of the game in many markets, and trust will require to be seen as a best practice player in terms of responsible AI.
Great. Thanks a lot. It's always a great pleasure to listen to you, Sylvain. Thanks for being with us and sharing your vast experience. And we are looking very much forward to collaborate more with you and BCG Gamma and discuss further on the topic of responsible AI and beyond. Thanks for being with us. Now,
thank you, Dalit.
Welcome. Now I'm excited to introduce you to our first panel discussion about ethical AI, the global landscape from the perspectives of society, regulation, and business, chaired by Tom Allen. Now, dear audience, it is my great pleasure to announce that Tom Allen has recently joined Swiss Cognitive as a facilitator and panel chair, and will support our team with his amazing talent, unlocking the potential of every panel discussion, captivating the audience. Tom, you are the founder of the AI Journal, a free open source information hub on AI and emerging technologies. You have a passion for providing tools and resources to educate people on these topics covered on the AI Journal and provide the audience with an engaged platform to help them. I'm honored to introduce you to our diverse panelists now, coming from business, nonprofit, and academia, giving a comprehensive overview about the global perspective of ethical AI. Super important here is having someone like MIIA representing the young generation too. MIIA, you are the Information Technology Officer as UNICRI Centre for AI and Robotics, where you contribute with your technical skills to conduct research and provide analysis on the role of AI and robotics in law enforcement and crime prevention. With a biomedical engineering background and a master in AI and cognitive science, you have already worked in the R&D of augmented reality glasses, developed hardware for space industry, and taught machine learning and data processing at Tilburg University. MIIA, I'm honored to have you here representing also the younger generation. With you, we have Anne Ertz. You are the head of the Novartis Foundation, an organization committed to transform the health of low-income populations, passionate about improving population health through data, digital, and AI. You apply your relentless commitment to overcoming health inequalities to pioneer solutions that can advance health and care globally. Next to you, we have Annabella. Annabella, you are the CFO of Ringier Group. You began your career at Ringier in 2007, working in a number of financial roles. In addition, you have also been responsible for Ringier's activities in Romania and are a member of the board of directors of Ticket Corner and Ringier Digital Ventures. In November 2019, you launched the initiative Equal Voice, where you know I'm a big fan of. Equal Voice, which aims to give women and men an equal voice in media by benefiting from cognitive technologies. Another great initiative in our community, which Swiss Cognitives love to support. Last but not least, I'm welcoming Usama. You are a thought leader in the area of data science and AI. When one of Fire's startups was acquired by Yahoo in 2004, he became the first person known to hold the title of Chief Data Officer. Since 2008, he has been leading Open Insights, a company that deploys data-driven solutions to grow revenue from data assets. Fayed was named the Executive Director of the Institute of Experiential AI, which focuses on application-driven, human-centered AI to optimize what humans and machines do best, respectively. My dear AI thought leaders, the virtual stage is yours. May I hand over to you?
Introduction. And just before we kick off, I want to say thank you to everyone attending today, to all the great speakers I've got with us today. Really grateful to have your time. And let's delve straight in. So, Anne, I'd love to come to you first. And I'd love to understand, COVID has made businesses of all sizes in various sectors across the world shifting to going digital and improving its infrastructure so we can work remotely. Why is it important to take the momentum of digital transformation brought by the pandemic and now transform our health and care systems?
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, it's really the moment. We have to take this moment that we have. COVID has been a wake-up call that we really are not ready to address all the global health challenges we face today. We are facing unprecedented challenges because countries are coping with a dual burden of disease. Infectious diseases are far from finished, and there's this rising tide of chronic cardiovascular disease, cancers, and all these other chronic diseases, but also this constant threat of new emerging diseases like we see with COVID, and even creating a syndemic now between the cardiovascular disease and the COVID infections. But that, together with the health worker shortage around the world, 15 million skilled health professionals we are missing, and with the rapid urbanization that leaves cities really unequipped for our health infrastructure, we cannot just continue delivering health and care like we do. We need to transform our systems and make them, instead of being these reactive care systems, becoming more proactive, predictive, and ultimately preventive so that they can keep the populations healthy they want to serve. And that's what COVID brought to us. Even the most skeptical ones amongst the health professionals have been cleared over the threshold to use digital and virtual health and care, and seeing the benefits of it and outweighing the risks far from with COVID. We need to scale that now really massively around the world.
Yeah, And I love that point, Anne, because I always look at things from a risk and reward scenario. And I think that's you summed it up perfectly, looking at what the risks are compared to the opportunities and the risks and the benefits. And I think that's great. And Usama, I'd love to come to you next to follow on from the great things Anne's just said. With digital transformation initiatives, that they're changing our healthcare systems, they're changing manufacturing systems, they're changing all verticals, all industries. From your experience with Open Insights, how do you see companies effectively integrating AI technologies, and what are the core challenges they're currently facing?
Yeah, so first of all, everybody I talk to says they want to do AI. Yeah. Not many understand what AI can really do, and more importantly, what it can't do, and what it does really poorly. But one of the patterns that's consistent, that is very ill understood, is the fact that the only parts of AI that work reliably and robustly are related to machine learning. And that's not because we have great algorithms in machine learning, which is part of AI, or in AI in general. It's because we have a lot more data than we have algorithms. So people actually use that data to kind of, I call it, regress their way around the real problem of answering intelligence. Now, what comes up is when you rely on data, well, then everything is dependent on the quality of that data that comes in. Are you capturing the right data? Are you capturing it at the right level of granularity? Because what we need for analytics as humans is completely different than what a machine needs to see to kind of come up with inferences. And then there's a lack of appreciation of how weak the algorithms are and how they could get you in trouble so quickly. I'm sure we'll talk about that later. But if you feed an algorithm data that is biased in ways that you may not know, it will come up with really biased, really ugly conclusions. It will drive you into areas of problems, both legal, on the privacy side, and most importantly, on kind of the fairness and equity side. So it's very important to think both. Whenever you say AI, you got to think, okay, what data assets do I have? What do I need to do on data to get it to be in shape to enable the AI? And then what do I watch out for when I enable that AI and it's suddenly making predictions about people?
Yes. And I think it's such an important point, Usama, because looking at digital transformation, I always say the amount of times people look at the technologies and not the people and what they actually want to achieve and what the roadmap is, which is really important. And I think this brings me on to the next point. So Annabella, I'd love to come to you, because obviously digital transformation initiatives, whatever it is you're doing, whatever sector, it's the people that drive it. And I think top level right through to bottom level, it's important to have everyone involved. So I'd like to ask you, why does a CFO get engaged in the diversity topics, and why is it not a HR topic, especially when looking at topics such as AI?
Well, I think it's a leadership topic, right? And I think it's important that the board takes responsibility for it, and it's not delegating this to HR. Why do I think so? I do believe that diversity is a business strategy. It's similar as our decision, are we going to invest in tech and data, or are we investing in Asia or Eastern Europe or even Africa, where we are present? So that's why I think you cannot delegate it. And why do I believe is diversity such an important business strategy? Because of 4 reasons. First of all, I do see business opportunities in diversity, because as we are all aware, and it's scientifically proven, the diversity in the workforce increases profitability. Second, talent attraction. 73% of employees do not apply for a company if the company values don't fit to their personal values. So I do believe it's a talent attraction tool as well. Third, employee engagement. We actually are seeing it at Ringier, because most employees want their work to contribute to a greater goal and a greater meaning and even an impact on society. Yeah. And last but not least, brand recognition. Customers are willing to invest more into a product or service if they are aware that the company behind it is committed to social or sustainable goals as well.
Love it. And I love how you've just touched on that as well, sustainable and social goals at the end, because it lines up perfectly for the next question. And Maria, I want to come to you and looking at the possibility of achieving responsible AI. So it's all great if you have AI in your business, and we've seen it a lot with a lot of the frameworks coming out in the EU. How is it possible to achieve responsible AI, please?
Yes, exactly. So that's the reason we are all here, right? So we at the Center for AI and Robotics, we do believe that it's possible to achieve responsible AI as long as it fully respects human rights. So AI is such a powerful tool that can contribute to solve some of the most complex challenges of the world and even help achieving these sustainable development goals of the UN agenda. But as any other tool, it can have this dual impact effect. So in one hand, it can be misused for malicious purposes. On the other hand, their legitimate use can have side effects. So we have to work to minimize this negative impact. So in our center, we work to develop guidelines, recommendations, good practices that help to design and implement this technology in an ethical and trustworthy manner. And it's not the first time we are regulating technology in history. So we had to do it with the cars by imposing a speed limit to minimize car accidents. So yes, we think that definitely it is possible to achieve responsible AI, but we need a proper policy and regulatory response.
Yeah, I love that answer. I love it. And it makes me look the next question, which is coming to Anne. And obviously, to have ethical AI and responsible AI, it comes down largely what machine learning runs off data. So looking at what data you have, is it clean? Is it structured? Have you got the right ideas? Have you got the right roadmap for it? And Anne, I've actually been in contact with your colleague, Eva Martins from Novartis, and done some great work through Novartis with the AI Journal. And one part was looking at data. So I'd love to come to you and get your opinion, Anne. How can data and AI be a part of the solution that's driving transformation in areas such as our health systems?
Oh, thanks, Tom. I think data have to be part of the solution, as you rightly say. And we've seen COVID has shown that the absence of real-time data has become a question of life and death, in fact. COVID has been the first pandemic or epidemic that has been driven completely by data. But we've seen also in our work in urban population health around the world, for example, that if you hand over or you help authorities to get the real-time data in their hands, you can really rapidly improve outcomes. In the city of São Paulo, a mega city of 15 million, for example, we work together with the city authorities to drive a comprehensive cardiovascular population health model called Cardio, where we work both on early access, good quality of care, but also intersectoral collaboration. And everything is driven by data. As soon as the government got these real-time data on health outcomes in their hands, we improved the health and the impact of this initiative, the whole way of addressing population health in the city massively. So in 1 year of implementation of a data-driven strategy that works on both access and quality of care, you can, for example, triple blood pressure control rates in the whole city of São Paulo, which translates then in a significant reduction of numbers of strokes in the population. And obviously that's what counts. We want to help people living a longer and a better life. So you need to have that data in your hands. Normally countries have to work with old data, with data coming from WHO reports, and they are 1 or 2 years old, and they cannot really do intelligent planning then. If you have real-time data, you can really allocate your scarce resources better, and you can choose those interventions that have the greatest impact on the largest number of people.
Yeah, I love what you just said, Anne, because you look at it from the amount of lives it can save and how it can help. And also that takes strain off. I can't remember the stat exactly, but it was if everyone made sure they ate the substantial amount, the amount of money and the amount of stress that would take off the health systems. And it's
exactly.
It comes into the financial cost, right? To bring it off, and you'll have better circulating economies. So I think that's I think it's an awesome point.
Absolutely.
It brings me to the next point, Maria. I want to come back to you again. So looking at the Centre for AI and Robotics mandate is to understand the risks and benefits of novel technologies and explore their contribution for a future free of violence and crime. And I think Anne's point touches on that. Better health and better welfare, you're going to have probably less crime and less violence. And I think the question I want to ask is, can the use of AI by law enforcement be a risk? And if so, how can we minimize these risks?
Yes, thanks, Tom. Yeah, indeed, the use of AI by law enforcement can be a risk, and a lot has been said about the risk of compromising some human rights, including the right to privacy, the right to non-discrimination. But again, if the technology is regulated properly, we can try to minimize those risks while making the most of this technology. So, and how can we do this properly? Although there are these general principles of ethics, fairness, accountability, transparency, and so on, that must be cross-cutting, we believe that recommendations should be specific for each domain, because it's different to apply AI in healthcare, as Anne was saying, or in law enforcement. For example, gender can be relevant to understand the disease, but not so relevant for in the criminal scene. So together with Interpol, we are developing a toolkit for the responsible use of AI by law enforcement, so specific for this domain. And so the idea is not to be another set of AI guidelines, but we would like to provide real use cases that exemplify how to operationalize these principles into real actions in an easy and practical manner, so that law enforcement can really employ it while using AI.
Yeah, I love it. I love looking at the way that AI can be used in law enforcement, and in I mean, lowering the amount of people that get to prison, or understanding why people do what they do, and lowering that kind of category of I don't know, crime even starting to happen. I mean, you're seeing it a lot with facial recognition, and that's what regulations were touching on, especially in the UK. Is it ethical? Can we record people? Can we do this of them in the streets? And I think it's a great point you made there. So, Usama, I'd love to come back to you, and we're obviously on the spotlight of all things AI and digital transformation discussions in the healthcare sector, crime sector, all the different areas we're touching on. And I'd love to know what the kind of discussions that nearly all organizations and societies overall are having. What's going on in that sector?
Yeah, so there, I mean, especially with COVID, there's been an amazing acceleration of digitization in general. The biggest issue we see very consistently, probably across all organizations in all sectors, is people approach digitization with the thinking that, hey, we want to automate workflows, and we'll get AI to work later, right? Once they did this automation, you know, a lot of them, first of all, will automate pretty bad workflows that required a lot of human judgment to make them, you know, work properly. But now they get kind of solidified in processes and machines that kind of make robotic decisions without thinking, resulting in poor experience by users, poor experience, poor outcomes, poor outputs even. So what happens usually, that the wave we see is a lot of, I call it kind of building instant technical debt, which is you kind of do your digitization, then you realize, oh my God, without getting all the data right, I don't understand what's happening anymore in the channel. And worse, I don't even have the humans who can help me understand what's going on. Why am I losing customers? Why are people upset? Why is so-and-so outraged, and so forth? So the pattern we see here is a pattern where you come back in almost every digital transformation effort. There's another follow-on that has to do with, let's get the data right, so then we can enable the AI. And then the third part, which I see all the time, you know, people say AI is very powerful. It's an amazing technology. I mean, for those who work in it, AI algorithms are extremely silly, right? Really stupid. And if you feed them certain things, they will do other things, and they have no way of telling that what they're doing is silly or ridiculous or unacceptable. Yeah. So that level of kind of common sense reasoning and an ability to kind of understand that, hey, I actually need an intervention by human. Yeah. And how do I bring the human in the loop? And how do I do my AI in a human-centric way? Is a big question that's not being addressed. And it's really a huge question, which actually includes, of course, fundamentally responsible AI. How do you guard against these things creeping in on you and making you do really bad things? The last thing I'll say here is, you know, if people take their time and think through how silly the algorithms are, and then how we need to approach them, and what context do I have to give the machine, because the data doesn't give you the context. You know, I collected these data points. The context usually contains, you know, 80 to 90% of the information or more. We talked in the beginning about kind of structured and unstructured data. You know, a lot of this unstructured data contains amazing signals. Yet, you know, most database technology only speaks structured. So people only try to leverage that structured. You know, Gartner says 90% of data in any organization is unstructured. So that question of thinking through the unstructured data, how do you get meaning out of it, and how to use it properly, is a very big deal, and it's a pattern. Every digital transformation ends up hitting this roadblock.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Simon. We see it all the time when I get press releases come through and just the kind of challenges they're having. And I think it comes to our next point, which I want to come to Annabella about diversity, because again, they just don't, when we see companies using AI and I speak to them and we go on interviews with them, you'll be amazed. Like, I'm amazed how much unstructured data, they don't have a full roadmap for how they want to use AI. They don't look at it for a 5, 10 year, 15 year kind of status. And I think that's why it always comes back to me, get people with talent, get people that will bring new ideas. And I think that's why it comes on to the perfect question to ask Annabella. How would you advise another company or a company to start with diversity or equal voice to do exactly what we've all touched on so far?
Well, my advice, always KISS. So keep it short and simple, because otherwise you will lose everybody. So I like to figure out 3 steps that we have conducted at Ringier. First of all, go ahead and define the diversity that you want to have in your company. So I'm talking about, do you want to have age? Do you want to have color? Do you want to have sexual orientation or gender as a diversity, or like a combined mix? So define what kind of diversity you need to drive your business, right? Second, so step 2, ask yourself, how can we hire, retain, and promote this diversity? I think it's really important that you just have those 3 pillars. So it's just promotion, retention, and hire. And then the third step is define the activities exactly in those 3 categories, and for the different diversity layers that you want to create or to increase, right? And what we did at Ringier, because it's not only called diversity, it's called inclusion as well. So try to make this definition of the activities, try to make this interactive. Don't do this top down. Just create workshops where you can discuss this with your employees. And you will see the engagement of the employees will be breathtaking, because they are just, they want to have those opportunities to discuss a company culture as well. Yeah. And exactly the point you were just pointing out, Tom, it's so important that you are measuring it, right? You have to measure the beginning, and then you have to define the milestone that you want to reach. And I believe it's so important. What gets measured gets managed.
Yeah. And I want to make it very public to everyone here. What Annabella said with the framework, I fully intend on taking that, because I think it's awesome to how you're using it and how you're bringing that into companies, because I love it when things are simple. I look at AI and people want to over mystify it, and I think this isn't a tricky, maybe getting into it and building an algorithm's tricky, but the roadmap for it shouldn't be that hard. What do you want to do? Lower cost, reduce your headcount, or whatever it is, increase your profits. And it brings me on to the next question really nicely, because Maria, I want to come to you about regulation, and regulation is a very sensitive point to me, because you're seeing with the EU regulations, and I think, as Annabella's just touched on, we can't regulate what we don't know, and we can't regulate what's coming out, and having that roadmap. And I think it's really important to understand that things are changing so quickly. How stable is that regulation going to be? Because by next year or 6 months, we've moved on again. And I'd love to ask you the question, can hard regulation in AI limit innovation?
Yes, exactly, Tom. So it depends on the industry and how the regulation is designed, because it could potentially even speed up innovation rather than slow it down. For example, in industries like aviation, the non-existence of AI safety regulations can be an obstacle to progress. So, but as you were saying, the technological advances are happening faster than our ability to respond. And if governance cannot keep up with the pace, we risk falling into practices of banning in an event to minimize the risk that can come with the use of AI. But unfortunately, there is no quick fix solution for this problem. Dealing with such fast changing technologies requires holistic solutions that monitor the technological advances and stay always ahead of the problems, proposing more advanced solutions. So this is really a process that requires a cross-discipline and cross-national cooperation to discuss the legal and ethical implications of the use of AI. And this is exactly what our center tries to do, to promote relationship building, knowledge sharing with stakeholders throughout the public sector, industry, academia, and civil society to really achieve a responsible use of AI that can maximize its benefits and minimize its risks.
Yeah, and I love what you said there, MIIA, because when you look at things like responsible AI, it's always important, and I'm guilty of this as well, and I know a lot of people that are guilty of it, to actually you look at the application.
Hi, once again, we're struggling with basic infrastructure. And they're back.
Continue with the car accident and, complete crash. And that's when you lose your customers, you lose your credibility, you lose your market position, you can lose all sorts of stuff on the reputational side, you lose your employees, as we're seeing happen with a lot of the high-tech companies. So it's very important to think of this as part of the process, right? Which means design it in a way where you're actually thinking through, am I getting all the right opt-ins? Am I getting permissions? Am I being transparent and in disclosing what I'm doing? And am I giving kind of an economic return to the users or to the people that are being kind of monitored or the AI is being used on? Those are very important, because if you do it right, people will actually demand it, right? They don't want to give up the benefit. They want the economic benefit, and they say, you know what, I gave it in return for something.
Yes.
We see that happening. We've seen some countries, I'll leave them unnamed, I guess, who kind of, with disregard and impunity, go ahead and just use, data wantonly without thinking it through. I am sure, right now they get a bunch of advances, but soon enough, they're going to get a whole bunch of problems happening. So to me, I view it as a way to speed up safely and do it correctly. I think if you're proactive about doing it, you don't have to wait for a regulator to force you to do what's right. I mean, in banking, this happened. People waited too long, and then the regulator actually saved them because they actually forced them to go back and ask the right questions about their data, about the risk assessment, about all that stuff. We face a similar situation in AI, and I think companies can take the initiative. It's never going to be self-regulated, but if you do the initiative and you're ahead of the curve, you avoid this from being an overhead. And this is what we're doing at the Institute for Experiential AI. Experiential AI is our word for kind of augmenting humans with the right algorithms that enable to amplify intelligence.
Yes.
And using humans when you need humans, absolutely, right? So that combination is critical to getting things right, and that's where we strike the balance of both appreciating the limitations and understanding the dangers.
Yes, I love it. And it goes back to, I think Can made the point as well, looking at the opportunities and looking at the risks and making sure they're weighed up and making sure what we're doing is the right path for it, which kind of nicely brings me into the next question for you, Anne, which is making sure, so we've all touched on it, the importance of knowing the data and the importance of knowing the roadmap, the talent, our diversity, and making sure on a wider level, not just our local community, how can we make sure that no countries, no communities are left behind in realizing the potential of AI in healthcare? Because let's admit it, healthcare is what keeps us alive, right? The most important thing.
Exactly, Tom. And I think that's very important in the field of responsible AI, is that we leave no country, no one behind. And that's, in fact, been the topic of our work with the Broadband Commission for Sustainable Development, where I chair the working group on health and AI in health last year. We distilled from a landscape analysis of 300 impactful AI in health solutions. We distilled 6 main areas that all countries have to invest in to make sure that they advance on their readiness to deploy AI solutions in the health and care system. And I'm really happy to hear today that Usam and many others have highlighted so many of those areas. And the first and foremost important area is the data and digital skills of people, the workforce, the government, everybody in a country should be able to use digital and AI solutions, otherwise it won't work. A second area is obviously the data and the infrastructure, but let's not forget half of the world is still not connected to broadband. We need to make this call for governments around the world to make sure that all of their populations get access to internet. Otherwise, it's never going to be possible to advance on your readiness to use AI in your health system. The third area is one you highlighted, Maria, is really on how countries have to make sure that they have the right governance and regulatory systems in place to keep their people safe and secure. And the fourth one was again highlighted so nicely by you, Usama, is that you need to have your innovations be using human-centered design. They have to be needs-driven, not solutions-driven. And you have to include the needs of the end user in your design. Also already foresee the problems you can identify to integrate those solutions in the normal health workflow. So if you have identified those processes upfront, then it will be successful. And lastly, the two last areas is really about coordinating the partnerships around it. The government has to have a coordinating role there, otherwise you end up with a fragmented landscape, as we saw in the digital health space in many, many countries. And lastly, if there's not enough funding for an AI-driven health system, then countries have to be open to let go of innovative ways to financing such new business models. And that's really important as well. So these 6 areas, we have translated them in a very simple self-assessment tool for countries that is now online, freely available on our website. So everybody's welcome to explore that and see if it can help advance us.
Awesome. And yeah, that's a really good point, Anne, because looking at it from a global scale and making sure people understand it and making sure people understand what we can use it for and how we can benefit people, because I get the classic question, being a publication, AI is coming to take my jobs. And I think, no, it's not. It's coming to enhance it. It's coming to help you. It's coming to drive you. It's coming to do so many better things. And I think what each of us have touched on in this conversation, which I really thank you each for, is that exactly that we're helping people, we're doing great, and it's building better communities and better healthcare. So that's the end of our time. I can see that our time limit's come up. And from that, I think Dalif will be coming back on. And my last message is I just want to say thank you to each of you for joining today, Annabella, Anne, Usana, and Maria. Really appreciate it. And thank you to the whole community that's watching today. It's been a real great experience, great learning curve, and thank you.
Wow. Thank you all, Maria,
Anne,
Annabella, and Usama. Just remain with me a little bit. We have such a diverse audience with us, and I can only imagine how much they benefit from all your insightful experience. And again, we had so many very important points saying from that actually it's our own responsibility. And Usama, for example, said that the companies need to take the responsibility. And if we talk about companies, at the end of the day, it's us, the human being. Or also what Annabella said about not going top down. It's about including the teams, including the employees. At the end of the day, we're talking about our future. And this actually brings me to one only question that comes from my own perspective to Maria. Listening to what you've heard before from Sylvain, now from your panel, and whatever will come, most of us are at least one generation above. If you have one wish that you can share with our AI community now, what can we do to support the younger generation that at the end of the day, every single decision we're taking is towards your future? So I'll give you another minute to have a wish to our community.
Well, I think it's everything we have been saying here. It's that AI can have more good than bad, that can bring, can help solve some of these complex challenges of the world, and minimizing their risks at the maximum. I think it's what everyone wishes here.
Thanks a lot. So thanks again. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Anne, Maria, Annabella, and Usama for being with us. It was really exciting. Hope to see you soon with us on stage again. To the audience, we got quite some questions. Please reach out to the panelists or also discuss the question and the answer in the chat. A lot of other AI thought leaders are listening to that and are able actually even to answer the questions in the chat. Now let's switch to practical insights into ethical AI and getting the fundamentals right with Patrick about predictive quality, getting AI things explained. Patrick, your strengths include combining technology and business. You studied business administration and computer science. After working as a software developer and project manager, you worked for 5 years as an IT engagement manager and agile coach for an international software provider, especially in the area of software enterprise solutions. But since October 2018, you have been CEO and co-founder of the company Leftshift and a keynote speaker in the field of AI. So predictive quality, getting AI things explained, Patrick, the virtual stage is yours. Okay, this is one of my favorite stuff, as you know, when we have troubles with basic infrastructure. So we're waiting to get Patrick in to share his experience and explaining about the use case. Here we are. Okay.
It works. You can hear me?
Cool.
Yeah. Okay. Then I will start. Thank you very much, Dalit, for your introduction. My name is Patrick, and I'm one of the founders and CEO of Leftshift. Today, I would like to give you a short overview of how Leftshift address responsible AI based on one of our use cases about predictive quality by Fresenius and how we get AI things explained. I would like to talk today about how we use AI in pharmaceutical sector. And we're using 2 different approaches in predictive quality to generate business value for our clients. In addition, I would like to talk about how we're implementing responsible AI. So first of all, who is Leftshift? We founded in 2017.
Sabrina?
Sorry, can you hear me? Okay, I will go ahead. We founded in 2017, and now we have just 40 employees, and we have offices in Graz and Munich and are expanding into Switzerland and the Netherlands. And since Leftshift was founded, we have invested all our knowledge in the field of AI in our AI operating system in order to put AI solutions in production. We are very proud to be one of the top AI companies in the entire GSE region, according to the Forbes magazine. And at Leftshift, we stand for symbiotic artificial intelligence. That means we believe in the positive interaction of humans and machines. That means human and machines and not human or machines. And our goal is to develop AI solutions together with our customers to generate a sustainable, positive return of investment and business value. In comparison to standard solution in the AI sector, we think about business models in a new and disruptive way, due to our independence from the industry, and it is essential that the customer brings in his domain knowledge. This is what we did with our client in the following use case, predictive quality. So in the production of pharmaceutical products, each product batch passes through the production process from filling to packaging. During the whole production process, different events occurs along the production chain. There are 2 different events that are minor, called incidents, and events that require action on the part of the quality management, called deviations. The deviations must be checked by the quality management. And for example, contamination or damage of the production batch and must be removed from the production line. So up to 800 events occur on a production line every month. Most events are incidents and are minor, but machine malfunctions can trigger such events. For example, caps do not close correctly and due to wearing. But issues can also be caused by non-machine events like human errors. The goal of quality assurance is to avoid damaging or rejecting the production batch. Let's now look at the quality process from a data perspective. And now we have to differentiate between the machine data and the data generated by the operator. So on the one hand, we have the possibility to use machine data in order to detect possible events. Basically, a typical example for using artificial intelligence, and it's nothing new, called predictive quality. Of course, we predict malfunctions of sensor or malfunction of production machine itself. AI performs data analysis or time series analysis to predict events, or anomaly detection is also be possible. By comparing historical data from incidents or deviations, conclusions can be made, but you can only measure what you can measure. Sometimes the data is simply not enough because the data is not available in the data sets to explain events. For example, if parts of a machine are deformed or due to wearing, and there are no sensors on the component, there are no data available. So additional sensors would be necessary here. And this brings me to the second approach to generate more data. We have to go one step further here. Employees on the production line have to track every event anyway due to legal requirements. Events were documented by hand and submitted to the quality department to decide whether there is an incident or a deviation. Actions were then developed for corrective events. Now we can use this practice. We digitalize this process and support the operator with an AI-supported assistance system. The advantage is clear. The assistance system supports the operator in the input of events. The system reminds the operator when data is missing and also provides suggestions for solutions in the future in order to correct the event. Due to textual input or structured data, the assistance system can also make predictions based on historical tickets or ticket data and text as whether it's an incident or a deviation. The basis for this natural language understanding or cluster analysis or named entity recognition. And the biggest approach or the biggest advantage in this approach is, however, is the human being itself. Human can also recognize errors and causes without having the appropriate sensors installed because of our natural intelligence. So let's take a look to the solution itself. Now the operator can create a ticket via human-computer interaction interface and describe the event textually. Structured data and unstructured data are recorded using different AI models such natural language understanding or named entity recognition. The AI is able to make prediction on that basis. The AI provides a suggestion whether it's an incident or a deviation. In addition, the AI provides an explanation and the likelihood. It is 80% an incident, so it's a minor issue. The following text parts, such as filling level too low or filling machine and emergency stop, have led to this result. So explainable AI is in use. The evaluation recommendations still have to be confirmed or rejected by the operator. QA can still reject the decision as well. In this way, a feedback loop, so the human is in the middle, is also built in the system so that the AI can learn after each ticket. By combining these two approaches, the evaluation of machine data and the tickets created by the operator with AI, the data can be combined. In this way, we bring together the best of both worlds. And symbiosis also means that everyone brings their strengths to achieve an optimal solution. This solution accelerates the whole quality process as tickets can be recorded and documented more quickly. The operator receives immediate feedback and bottlenecks in the quality assurance can be resolved. In addition to the machine data, the domain knowledge of the employee is integrated and continuous learning is possible. Explainable AI is used to explain decisions and to develop corrective events. The goal is to reduce the events to a minimum. The economic aspect is also given, as paperwork is also reduced to a minimum due to digitalization. Every decision made by AI is traceable. The domain knowledge is not lost because the AI learns from the organization in symbiosis. The jobs are protected because the human is involved in this process as a feedback provider. Good. As you have seen, there's a lot of AI models in use and the AI models need to communicate with each other. For this reason, we use our internal marketplace to create the solution. The internal AI marketplace is like an app store. AI-based models from text and image understanding or big data and cluster analysis is available. The AI-based models are pre-trained and then still need to be adapted to the customer's data. This happens within the project, but it is much faster if we have to build it from scratch. Each model has the functionality execute, so the inference, execute the model, train the model, and explain. The model explains itself. So as Leftshift one, it was important for us to make this marketplace available to our clients. The goal was to enable the clients to use AI quickly and easy on their own. We operate this marketplace in our own AI operating system to guarantee a stable and smooth operation. Our solution is used by citizen data scientists, machine learning engineers, and DevOps engineers. We bring the stakeholder together that they can build AI applications by their own. So the future is now. Therefore, it's important to focus on future-proof technology. AI is in use and will be used more and more to generate competitive advantages. AI applications and hyper-automation is in place. And we will see that we need to deploy a lot of machine learning models in the enterprise environment. So ML operations is required. We will see that we have to combine different application and machine learning models, like composite AI is required, as we've seen in this use case. We will also see that we must deal with explainable AI solution to derive actions. So explainable AI have to be in place. So responsible AI and imperative. Responsible AI is state of the art and we have to deal with it. However, any AI solution only creates value if we can understand the decisions to derive or drive actions. This functionality is necessary to understand the results of the AI models. That is why and how an AI model comes to a decision. In addition, we need to guarantee after each training that the AI models do what they are supposed to do to create trustworthiness. This approach also enables certification of AI application in the corporate and for computer validation. So let me come to the next and the last topic, how we implement responsible AI in our perspective. We see three central elements in relation to responsible AI. The first is XAI. The second is the validation of AI, and the last point is the documentation of the AI results. So in the area of machine learning, data for predictive quality, and we need to take a detailed look at the data set. So is there enough data available? What about the distribution of the data set and how are the hyperparameters distributed? Does the data set contains a bias that we do not want, or is the data set unbalanced? In our use case, we naturally have more incidents than deviations. That is the reason why data augmentation is used. Of course, we also want to know which features contribute to the final result, so data analysis is necessary. Explainability in this case of human-computer interactions created by different AI text modes. The relevant text segments are marked visually. Additional trained entities made visible to the user, and categories are defined or clusters are found. After using the different AI models, similar history events are found and compared with each other. Afterwards, the event can be assigned to a deviation or an incident with corresponding likelihood as we've seen in our assistance system. So let's go to the scale concept. We want to take a closer look to the validation of AI models and solution. And we assume that the AI model is too small to generate business value. Therefore, I want to introduce you to our AI skill concept. The skill is the smallest unit that generates business value. We have three different components. We have data from the legacy system, we have the AI ML components with tensors and neural networks, and we have the inference model in it, and we need the code to combine this. Their three components are important and are part of the machine learning skill to solve an issue or optimize the process, and now we should combine them. And what we're doing, we combine the skill concept and the software test pyramid to explain and to be trustworthy. We expand the whole concept with two different layers. We start with code, something that we know, and we create automated tests. And we have our own pyramid for data to do the data analysis and define the limits. We need a pyramid for AI and machine learning as well to test the results of the AI model. And in the end, we have the compliance and contract tests for performance, ground truth, and ethical aspects. And these contract tests are very necessary to test the communication between skills and other systems. They're helping us. And so we're using this concept, and what we have to do when we have more than one skill, we have the Sierpinski triangle. So it's possible to be explainable and trustworthy for composite AI as well. And the advantage of this validation concept is against explainable AI that we reach always the limits with explainable AI when it comes to deep learning. Sometimes the AI model is just too complex and we have to call it black box it, but it's okay. We don't always have to understand everything in detail, but we still have to be able to keep control. Therefore, we have this concept. Good. The last point is the documentation, and it's not necessary to understand this feature and how it works in detail and how we use it, because there are two important things in the whole picture. We create a unique identification number, like a fingerprint from data, code, and machine learning model out of the skill concept, and save each inference to run in the database. Now we can provide information at any time about which skill were used, which data in certain machine model state. And the other point is the feedback loop between human and artificial intelligence. There's the positive interaction between these two worlds, and we're talking about symbiotic responsibility in this case. And as humans, we are responsible to create the test set and how the AI should work and decide. We set the rules and the limits because we are in the feedback loop, and we must decide what is right and what is wrong. Today is only one thing that I want to share with you about the topic of responsible AI. It's not important what AI can do. It's important what AI is allowed to do. Thank you for having us.
Thanks a lot, and a great final quote, Patrick. Thanks for sharing your practical experience and expertise. This is exactly what we want, having practical use cases. How do we develop? How do we implement? And listening to your words, somehow it comes up to my mind. Leftshift 1 is the future Lego for AI. Now, we do have some questions from the audience, and due to time restriction, let's keep it short. One, a very practical one, is about, Patrick, are you starting to use synthetic data, as sometimes there are data gaps?
Yeah, of course, we're using that. We have a skill for that we can anonymize the data, and we're using synthetic data or data augmentation because we have to balance the data set. And in this case, it was necessary as well. And yeah, it's very important to do that. Yeah. Okay,
great, thanks. Another question, we have quite a lot, so here also again, reach out directly to Patrick. And some of the questions, by the way, what I was reading are more in general. Again, please, those of you who has the experience and the expertise, don't be shy and just put your answers into the chat. Now, another question to you, Patrick. How do you approach such a use case in the field of responsible AI and implement it correctly?
Yeah, in this case, we were in a high regulated industry, so it was clear from the beginning. We analyzed the issue, what we have to solve, what is the problem, and it was clear from the beginning that we have to use explainable AI. We have to think about the responsibility, and it was apart from the whole project. And what we see in this high regulated industries, so we will do that in future as well. So it was clear in this industry. Yeah.
Thanks. Thanks again for sharing those relevant insights and being with us, Patrick. And again, I hope that you will have some more discussion with people from the audience about practical implementations. Now, let's listen into responsible AI. This is how it's done. The panel discussion chaired by Claudio Mirti. Claudia, you have a customer-focused approach to leverage digital technologies to design and build innovative, game-changing solutions. Also, you know how data and AI can empower employees and ultimately help customers augment their businesses in new ways. Claudia, you worked at Microsoft and are a founder of different courses in the higher education in Switzerland and New York University with a focus of design thinking and AI. On your panel, I like to welcome Katja Walsh. Katja, you have 25 years of experience helping businesses win with digital data and AI. At Leewise, you focus on setting and executing digital strategies, infusing it with data and AI to deliver businesses value. Before Leewise, you were the first Chief Global Data and AI Officer at Vodafone, where you led teams for 25 countries and contributed to AI for social good. Katja, you have also driven customer-centric innovations in prudential financial, fidelity investments, and forester research. Thanks for being with us. Further, we have Mark Kane. You are a leader for the AI and machine learning at the World Economic Forum. Previously, you served at the African Union Commission and the UK's Foreign and Commonwealth Office, focused on issues at intersection of technology innovation, energy transition, and international development. Additionally, we have on our panel my dear friend Nancy Nemes, who is the founder and general manager of Nemes Venture and Humanize, and is a business and digital Darwinist. You are a creator loving life and traveling the world and bringing enthusiasm and vigor to people and companies through effective leadership, commercial and operational management of currency and ambition for the greater society cause. You are the managing director of the digital startup Nemes Ventures, founders of MIIA and Humanize, and a former leader at Google and Microsoft. You were named between 2001 and 2018 as one of the most inspiring businesswomen in European technology by Inspiring 50, and are definitely one of the role models that I'm looking to. Finally, we have on this panel Ivan. Ivan, Sherlock Holmes was your idol when you were a kid. You observed and gathered data around you, coming up with explanation that connects all the data that made you to Eureka. You still are like Holmes, but now in pharma. In your new role, your data now comes from various stakeholders across organizations to build explanations and create other Eureka moments enabling by new tech. Your goal is to use data science and AI and machine learning to find the right pharma R&D portfolio strategy in doing now what patients need next. Dear Claudia, the virtual panel is all yours.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And what a great panel list we have here. So let me share first a story from research before we deep dive into the questions. So a group wanted to use AI to help identify and monitor foxes. They took a set of fox images and trained the model. They took a set of dog images and trained the model on those. And the model performed reasonably well. Then the field tested, and it went well, except some terrible results in one specific area or in one location. Why? Well, most of the fox images are of foxes in the snow, not so much snow in that location, so maybe Australia or someone else. So this illustrates the importance of transparency and ethics. That means people should understand how decisions or recommendations are made, making it easier to raise awareness of potential bias, errors, and of course, unintended outcomes. With that, I want to ask Katja, what is the role of ethics in AI from your point of view?
Well, thank you, Claudio, and welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to join this panel and share some thoughts and experiences. The role of ethics in AI is the same as it is for everything else in the world and in life. What would life and business and society be like without ethics? So ethics is as old as the world, as old as our ancient Greek philosophers, and there is a reason that continues to stay throughout centuries and remain with us. Even as regulation changes, ethics remains the same. And I believe that ethics is just as important in AI as it is in the rest of society or technology or science or life. Perhaps it is even more important in AI to pay attention to and make sure that everything we do is founded and based on a very solid foundation of ethics, because the field is still novel. People still find it technical, perhaps even intimidating. That's why I love the introduction to Nancy, because I share this passion for humanizing AI
At the end of the day, it's humans that have created artificial intelligence, and they did create it and are continuing to create it for the benefit of humans and society overall. And what is more human than ethics? Distinguishing right from wrong, making sure that we always do what is the right thing. So the question is, how do you do that? Whether it's AI or in general, how do we make sure that we instill ethics in everything we do? And there are three pillars of that. One is ethical companies. Ethical companies is something very important. We now live in a society where business is actually expected to step in and do what used to be perceived as the role of governments, to do the right thing. We have seen across the world, but particularly in the United States, rise in activist leadership, where chief executive officers and presidents of businesses are actually expected to take a stand and to make a difference beyond what had been required of them in the past as business leaders. And I had the good fortune of having worked at very well-regarded companies in many different industries across the world that have always put ethics front and center, whether it was Forrester, which was helping businesses thrive on technology change, or Fidelity Investments and Prudential Financial, which were helping people save for secure retirement, or Vodafone Group in London, which connected the world, but it was also seen as #1 for doing well by doing good, because among other things, it created M-Pesa, which empowered people across the continent of Africa to have an economically sustainable lives. And now Levi Strauss & Company, which has always chosen to do the harder right over the easier wrong. And that is very important, choosing to do the harder right over the easier wrong. So ethical companies create ethical AI, and ethical people attract and keep ethical. Ethical companies attract and keep ethical people, and ethical people in turn instill and perpetuate ethical processes. AI is a very dynamic field, as we know. There are continuous changes. In the course of this particular panel, there will be new changes that will happen, whether it's new tools and new techniques or something else in terms of advancing the field. So regulation is not always able to keep up with the changes. Therefore, it is up to us, the leaders in this field, everyone in this field, from junior data scientists to people who are leading it across the world, implement ethics, because it is perennial and timeless. So that would be my summary of why ethics plays such an important role in AI, but it's much more than just AI.
Thank you, Katja. And as you said, the field and technique and the how, it's really important. So based a little bit on that, Mark, from your point of view as well, what key trends in responsible AI should listeners be thinking about? Maybe also to adapt certain aspects that Katja already mentioned, maybe also on the technical side, on the business side, from your point of view.
Sure. Thank you, Claudio, for that. And thank you to all the listeners for joining us for this panel. And I would really just build on Katja's comments there, which I think were very inspiring about the why of AI ethics. I think that was a very clear explanation of why we need to be making AI responsibly. And so a little bit of what we're seeing at the World Economic Forum, we have the good fortune of working with hundreds of companies, dozens of governments, civil society groups, academics all around the world, and just keeping tabs on kind of what's going on in terms of the conversation about ethical AI, where are there opportunities to move that forward, and what are the obstacles and what are the barriers that need to be overcome to achieve the kind of AI future that Katja helped us visualize there in her answer. And just a couple of trends that we're seeing that I think are going to be important to keep an eye on. So one is that we're really moving from a phase of AI ethics where we are focused on defining principles for AI ethics to figuring out how to operationalize those principles in practice. We did a survey a couple of years ago and looked at the proliferation of AI ethics principles and statements of principles by companies and other organizations. We found at the time that there were over 175 different sets of AI ethics principles that had been published. Now, if you actually look closely at them, it turns out they're all mostly the same principles. So there's maybe 10 to 15 or so principles that appear virtually everywhere. And what we've seen is that the challenge at this point on the back of these principles is not to sort of set out one's principles anymore. The challenge is to figure out how do you actually make your operations of your company, whether it's in the research, development, design, deployment of AI systems, actually comport with the principles that you've set out for yourself. A second big trend that we're seeing right now is that AI ethics, for a number of reasons, is moving from a kind of nice to have sort of corporate social responsibility kind of frame within companies to actually being considered mission critical and really becoming more of a core corporate function integrated across legal, compliance, product design, and other aspects of the company. That's in part in response to the rise of regulations, for example, the draft EU regulations that have come out, which are forcing companies to really think more seriously about how they approach these issues and how they document them and how they ensure compliance with the regulations that are out there. But we see this as very positive because it's really brought it much more central to company operations and also further up inside of companies to the C-suite, to the board of directors, etc. We're also seeing, importantly, I think, a move from a focus on AI ethics that has historically been mostly within the technology sector to a much broader set of industry sectors who are thinking about AI ethics. And that's because AI adoption itself has really moved very rapidly from the historical home for AI, which is the technology sector, to a number of related industries that are very data intensive, where there's a huge opportunity for AI to improve operations, improve outcomes, improve profitability, et cetera. So some examples include consumer finance, insurance, mobility, social media, et cetera. And these are areas where there's actually less capacity historically inside of these companies to really think through the ethical issues that AI presents. And so there's a really big opportunity right now to increase the focus of these other industries on the ethical aspects of AI. This is something that we work on every day. The last thing I'll say is that we are seeing, in terms of trends, two last things, a great amount of new collaboration. And I think that that's reflecting that companies realize that they can't necessarily address all of the ethical challenges of AI themselves. And this is very exciting for us because, of course, we focus on this kind of collaboration. So it has been good for our offerings and for our work. But there's a lot of new kinds of collaborations between industry, government, civil society, and academia that are really exciting and that are helping close some of the gaps in this AI ethics issue. Finally, and then I'll cede the stage to my colleagues, and I think this is one of the important ones that is very exciting to me, is that we're seeing AI ethics be thought about earlier in the product cycle than it used to be. A lot of the early AI ethics issues that came from AI ethics not having been thought about early enough in the product development cycle, and it only was thought about when it became a problem out in the world. And so I think very helpfully, unfortunately, we're seeing that companies are starting to think about ethics more integrally to the product design process, so they're not having to solve problems later on, but rather they can address them before they become problems through the development process.
All right. Thanks, Mark. And as you said, I think the collaboration part is key. And I think we are all here exactly a little bit to share our experience and to collaborate later on, or at least maybe for some project or some ideas. So Nancy, based on your experience, maybe could you share? So we heard a little bit also from Mark's side with the different industry, but could you share some practical examples how companies are applying responsible AI?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Claudio. This is an excellent headway also from Mark's discussion, and I'd love to start. I have a few examples I can share, but I'd love to start with one that basically reflects exactly what Mark was talking about. At Microsoft in the United States, we have put together a council, a National Council for Artificial Intelligence, that is basically putting brilliant brains together from various areas. And we do this by industry. So a company like Microsoft, for example, is working with financial institutions and banks, is working with the pharma sector, is working with manufacturing, is working within the retail sector. And so what we started to do about 8 months ago, in addition to many other things I will tell you in a second about as well, is that we created this National Council for Artificial Intelligence in the banking sector. And basically, we've invited some of the most important banks. This is a highly regulated sector. We invited academia. We invited think tanks, such as the Brookings institutions, banks such as the MasterCard and Visa, but also NASDAQ, who has a very different way of looking at this aspect of responsible AI, in addition to universities, to work on the academic aspect and also making sure that we prepare the next generation of students in the right way for what the skills of the futures are, but also startup accelerators, specific financial system integrators. And this, we formed a board, and these people are meeting regularly. And what's really distinctive about this is that we have identified very specific areas that need specific attention in terms of what is this responsible AI. So some of the key questions that we are asking there is, for example, as you are looking into bias and fairness, are your algorithms making the decision that align with your values within your sector? Or do customers trust you with their data, and how can you ensure that there are standards and assessments that lead to a trustworthy management of customers' data that companies have? But also how the brand, how is, for example, the Microsoft brand or any other company looking into responsible AI, how is your brand affected if you cannot explain how your AI systems work? So driving this, specific area of what are the governance principles, what are the interoperability and explainability principles, how do we ensure bias and fairness? When you're a credit card institution, for example, how can you ensure that, for example, another situation when if you are living in a zip code that might be underserved or underrepresented, you might have an issue to get a credit issued to you only because you are living in the wrong area of that city or country, based on the zip code you have. And how do we ensure we drive a fairness execution through those algorithms? But also there are questions about the robustness and security of your systems, as well as the aspects we just discussed also with Katja, which are around the ethics and regulations. So we know there is a lot of ambiguity of where the responsibility lies if something goes wrong. And so a responsible view on this is an important driver for AI initiatives. And that's what we basically, in a way, for Microsoft, we try to really work on a consistent manner and really align with the user expectations, align with the organizational values, but also with the societal laws and norms. And in that respect, for example, to give you just a very practical example, is that Microsoft basically has a couple of internal organizations. They have an Office of Responsible AI that is looking into very specific questions around the principles I just mentioned. They also have a committee that is called the AI Ethics and Effects in Engineering and Resource, so that we can ensure that from an engineering and research perspective, we consider all the aspects, but also they have a responsible AI strategy in engineering committee. So all these committees basically advises their leadership on the challenges and the opportunities presented by these AI innovations, but also sets out rules and governance processes. So they form very clear organizations within Microsoft to work closely across teams and to enable these efforts of ensuring you have the right rules and governance processes, ensuring that we have teams that enable the implementation of responsible AI across engineering groups. Just to your point, Mark, that it's back from theory into how we really do it. So that's one way how Microsoft is doing more at the organizational level. And I wanted to also give you an example for maybe from Google, which is another company that is a pioneer in driving this. But I want to take you now a little bit more into the engineering space and more into how they looked at introducing their AI principles, and basically they articulated their responsible AI principles around 5 areas. Very clearly articulated many years ago already, and those areas are privacy, what happens with the privacy of my data, accountability, security, fairness, and interoperability. And when you look at some of their tools, one of the most famous machine learning tools, one of the most popular machine learning frameworks in the world is called TensorFlow. And that TensorFlow ecosystem, basically, they have incorporated responsible AI toolkit in the TensorFlow so that the developers anywhere that are using these tools can better integrate these principles in their machine learning development workflows. So at each stage in that TensorFlow development, the developers can face different responsible AI questions that are very clearly articulated and considerations, and so they have identified a number of steps from defining the problems, when is that AI actually a valuable solution? What problem are you trying? What's that? Okay, can you still hear me?
Yeah. Just go.
Go ahead. Okay, so I was just saying there are a couple of important steps also in the TensorFlow development toolkit that allow developers to go step by step all the way from defining the problem they try to solve through the use of the specific AI development, all the way to collecting the data, preparing the data, building and training a model, but also evaluating the performance of a model. So once you identify the model, for example, and you train that model, what kind of iteration process do you begin in order to ensure that the first version of a model does not perform the way a developer usually hopes it would? And so how do you integrate at each stage the right tools, and how do you address failures? And so finally, in terms of deployment and monitoring, that's also a very important step to go really all the way to the end. As they design and train their models, they use very specific artifacts, metadata throughout the development process, and they are all ingrained with specific contexts, that allow the traceability of intermediate components of the workflows, machine learning. And so basically ongoing monitoring is really a very important step along the development path to identify specific risks and also complications, and then to try to address them. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Nancy. And to take that a little bit, maybe also to summarize what I understand as the importance here is really, as you said, is an AI decision framework to have in place to really go like a step-by-step approach, system purpose, technology capabilities, and also quality and reliability. But now also thinking about now in another area, maybe also allowing to listen to Ivan on that approach as a part of how do we maintain. So Nancy mentioned that already as well, Katja and Mark with the collaboration part, but maintain transparency, make sure we reduce biases in our AI system. And now especially in your area with pharma, by leveraging massive amounts of data now actually. What do you think about it, Ivan, in that case?
Definitely, yeah. Thanks, Claudio, for that question. And a lot of what the panel has already mentioned resonates quite a bit. And when you think about pharma, for a very long time, we've been dealing with ethics, because naturally, when you deal with patients, when you deal with the data, there comes a question, what do we do with the data? What are we responsible for, and all that. So now that we have AI systems come in, that culture of thinking about ethics is kind of built in. But what we realize is AI systems themselves are actually kind of neutral. What influences the moral and ethical responsibility is the kind of data we put in to the AI system, and what do we do from the with respect to the outputs of AI. And that's where I guess the transparency will come in, from our perspective. Because to give you one example, when we talk about the inputs to the AI system, we mainly talk about two things. Do we understand all the assumptions behind the data we collect? Do we understand the data domains? For instance, do I understand that the data we collect from a cancer patient, for instance, is only applicable for this particular domain? And then the other aspect of it is, are we collecting comprehensive data? And what I mean by that is, traditionally, when we run clinical trials, we always have, this kind of groups that are not usually involved in clinical trials. For instance, young patients, and we've seen that in the COVID trials, right? So certain groups of young patients are not included. And then, we also have certain ethnic groups that are not typically included in clinical trials. And, with this realization, what we did, like in the recent history or in the past few months, is to launch this initiative of doing more inclusive research, in a sense of we think of what are the best ways to encourage more representation in the trials that we run, so that when we input it into our AI system, we reduce the bias automatically. So that's one aspect of it. And like what I mentioned, the other aspect is, what do we do with the outputs from AI systems? And that's really the benefit that I see being in the group, in the organization that helps drive the portfolio decisions that we make. It's like, which compounds do we advance in the next trial or not? And the idea there is really to use AI systems as a mirror, for the key decision makers. Are we understanding the assumptions well? Do we consider all the different aspects before we rely on what the AI system outputs? And can we actually rationalize this based on the more comprehensive understanding that we have from the biological and medical aspect? So these are some of the things that we have already embedded and think about continuously.
Okay, thank you. So a little bit to summarize that, what we discussed, I think, as I said, regulation is key, technical capability. I took some notes here as well. And as you said, and Mark said as well, the barriers to really avoid that, but also define the principles and also the part of design. So, and I think, and as we know, collaboration is key. So, regards now also on the time. So I think a little bit to think about it. If you have one sentence, now what we listened before as well on the part of setting the right user expectation, giving the right advice, but also building a framework with the right capabilities. So if you have like 1 minute to say one sentence, what will be that takeaway that all the audience here should know? So Mark, stage is yours. So 1 minute.
Sure, and apologies, the clouds have just changed the lighting in the room here. Yeah, 1 minute. I think I would just say to folks who are interested in leaning in on AI ethics within their company, really think about the full product cycle. Start at the beginning of it. Understand that every product is part of a bigger ecosystem within a company that brings together engineering, but also legal, management, operations, and also interfaces, of course, directly with users, with customers, and with the market. And so really think about it holistically in that respect, but break it down into the key pieces of that cycle to understand where do ethical challenges and obstacles enter into the equation, and how can you mitigate them as early as possible so that you are not on the back foot and being reactive, but rather can actually be scanning the horizon and being proactive and solving problems before they become large problems. The last thing I'd say in my 1 minute is just to think about how you can supplement your own capabilities by working with others who can help you do it. There's an amazing and growing set of nonprofits, academic organizations, certification bodies, others who are out there creating a really robust ecosystem. And I don't think that most companies or organizations will be able to solve these problems on their own. So really think about this as a kind of partnership, a sort of team sport, rather than something that you have to do on your own.
Perfect, thank you. Now over to Katja.
One sentence will be that diversity will save AI, technology, business, and society. And to expand a little bit on that, there are 3 points to that. We absolutely must have diversity in people. I know everyone is saying it, but it's one thing to say it, it's another thing to live it. And it's critical for ensuring that we have different perspectives, different backgrounds, different viewpoints. And one of the things that I hope we can continue to do as leadership in this area is to dispel the myths that AI practitioners only come from one background. Yes, we have lots of engineers and we want even more, but I've also had on my teams in various companies all over the world, statisticians, social scientists, philosophers, and just recently took people who have been working in retail stores and distribution centers with absolutely no background in coding and statistics and put them in an 8-week intense machine learning bootcamp. And at the end of it, they became machine learning practitioners, which goes to show that anyone with curiosity, with problem solving, and with resilience can be a part of this, and indeed should be a part of that to contribute to the diversity. The second part of diversity is about data, of course, and Ivan already touched on that. The more data we have, the richer it is, the more inclusive it is, the more diversity we'll have in the outcomes and the models. And of course, the third one is about the models and the tools. And Nancy touched on that when she talked about TensorFlow. That's why we love open source, because it doesn't lock you in certain ways and it always gives you inclusivity and ability to enrich. So yes, diversity will save AI, technology, business, and society.
Perfect. Thanks, Katja. Nancy, your 1 minute.
Yeah, so really adopting a cross-cultural perspective, which you already touched on, it is for me really important. Grounding your work in human-centric design. This is why Humanize has been created to really, promote that idea, extending transparency towards everybody, regardless of the expertise, and also operationalizing our learnings into practices. These are some of the steps we take to build responsible AI. And also building products with AI ethics in mind is really a combination of technical, product, policy, process, and cultural factors. And these are the concerns, and they are multifaceted and fundamentally socio-technical, not just technical.
Perfect. Thank you, Nancy. And Ivan, last but not least, from the pharma side. You're mute.
There we go. Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, I'll go back to one thing I mentioned earlier, is that AI systems are neutral. And therefore, we need to understand what assumptions are we bringing when we use these tools. In what human processes and systems are the AI embedded in. And then from there, we can develop a more inclusive culture on how we think about these tools. Like at the end of the day, these are just tools, and we have to use them consciously and not be subject to what number the AI is throwing out. So that's all I would say in this topic.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your contribution. And now I think let's put our principles into practice by taking really a people-centered approach in research, development, and deployment of AI. With that, thank you.
Thanks a lot. Please remain with me a little bit. And there is so much to share. There were, again, so many very interesting insights. One of the things that I really love, obviously, is what you said, Kate. Diversity will save AI. And I think diversity is going to save a lot of things, not only AI. And we really need to take this serious. Another thing, what I also really loved, what you said, Ivan, is about let's use AI as a mirror. And this is one of the things that I'm keeping telling everyone that I'm talking with them. Now we have the chance to unbias the bias. At the end of the day, it reflects our culture, our thinking, our attitudes, and gives us the chance to make it better. Some others that has been said, what I really liked, and we don't have the time to summarize, but what I really would love to do, Claudia, you are an AI thought leader by yourself, and you just chaired the panel. I would love to have one question to you that came from the audience, what is kind of critical, and therefore I think it's important to give an answer, and who would be better to answer that than you? The question from the panel was, from the audience was, what's the possibility that AI may surpass human intelligence?
That's a good one. So it's always like, as we're saying, empowering every person to achieve more in terms of it comes together. So we control it and we define it. And there are certain things that can be automated, but still it's a long path. So in certain areas, I'm not sure when it happens. As I said, as we work with the technology and make sure that we can control and define also the outcome, it is where always be a human and together with a system to automate certain tasks or services.
Thanks. I can't really remember. I think Katja mentioned that actually human created AI for the benefit for human. And I think this is really important. This is why I brought up this question, because it's always somewhere the elephant in the room. And thinking of what all the previous speakers said, and also discussing the real use cases, realizing how silly sometimes AI is, I think there is a long way to go. And here we really have to take the responsibility on how we develop applications, algorithms, how do we implement it. At the end, we're doing it for the sake of the human being and not against. So thanks a lot to all of you. Thank you, Katja, Mark, Nancy, and Ivan for enriching this event with your views. Thank you, Claudio, for this panel chair. And now it's time to move on to a keynote. Moving beyond principle, organizing a culture change. It's my great pleasure to introduce you to our next global AI thought leader, Steve Mills. Steve, you are a managing director and partner at Boston Consulting Group, where you serve as the chief AI ethic officers and led AI in the global public sector's practice. For more than a decade, you have served private and public sector's clients across health, finance, aerospace, environment, social impact, and defense. You're a published author and speaker on topics including data science, AI, and bias and fairness in machine learning. We're looking very much forward to learn from your vast experience. May I hand over to you, Steve?
Well, thank you so very much. I appreciate being here. I thought maybe today there were three things I could speak a bit about, and I've got some slides we'll just have as a backdrop because sometimes it's helpful to see the data. The first is to talk about why responsible AI is so important for companies. Then I want to talk a little bit about the industry and where many companies stand today, and then give some advice on how companies can get started. So let's start by talking about why this is such an important area and why it matters so much for companies to focus on it. Now, before I dive in, I did just want to pause, and we use this term responsible AI a lot. I think it tends to mean slightly different things to different people, and so I just wanted to touch on what do I mean when I say responsible AI? And at its core, it's about building AI product that ensures it's working in the service of good while still delivering transformative business impact. And I think that last piece is really important. This isn't an either or, it's an and kind of problem. I truly believe we can both have a positive impact on society through the products we build, but also deliver transformative business impact. And I think that's a really important thing for people to align on. In a practical sense, I think many people, when they hear responsible AI, think about fairness and equity, and certainly that is part of it. But it's far broader than that as well. In my mind, it includes making sure systems are safe and secure. We're protecting privacy. We're thinking about negative societal impacts, negative environmental impacts, and perhaps most importantly, think about how we are using AI to augment rather than replace humans. So when I say responsible AI, this is the broad view of the world that I'm thinking about. So why does this matter? And many companies, many executives I talk to immediately jump to this idea of risk mitigation. And there's certainly true risks for companies here. There's potential for litigation. We've seen litigation brought in several jurisdictions around AI lapses, increasingly regulatory concerns and regulatory compliance. There's also financial losses, either direct market moves after an AI lapse. We're seeing investors beginning to take more activist approaches to trying to drive companies towards adhering to ethical approaches. We're even seeing VCs being thoughtful about where they put their money, making sure that those businesses are following responsible AI practices. And the last piece is perhaps the most obvious, but reputational damage. When one of these lapses goes public, that's obviously a challenge for a company that's facing it. So that's sort of where many people focus. I would encourage us to actually think about it slightly differently and think about all the upside potential here. And it should go without saying that this is clearly the right thing to do, that companies should just focus on. But you know, in terms of driving a business case, I think there's a true upside potential here that companies should focus on. There's definitely a brand differentiation and customer engagement and retention aspect to it. You know, increasingly we're seeing, you know, people want to be associated with companies that are ethical and follow ethical practices. There was a survey of millennials, and it was nearly 100% wanted to be working with or purchasing from companies that they viewed as ethical and trustworthy. And this is a key way to drive that with your customers. And if you do, what we continue to see across industries is better long-term profitability as a result. And then the other piece of it is a little more internal focused. We're in a field, as we talk about AI, where there's, you know, everyone knows about the global talent war that's in place. Tech workers in particular are particularly concerned about making sure that there's ethical practices and social awareness within the product they're building. And so, you know, there's one survey, I think about a quarter of tech workers have left a job because they were concerned about the societal impacts of the technology. And so proactively addressing that not only prevents retention, but creates a magnet for recruiting purposes. So there's this real upside potential. And when we think about that, when we did a global survey, and if folks saw Sylvain's keynote earlier, he mentioned this, we did a global survey of about 1,000 companies. And one of the interesting observations is when you look at those that have leading responsible AI practices and what is motivating them, it's over 3 times, or there's more than 3 times the emphasis on realizing the business benefits than the risk mitigation. And these are the folks that are clearly the most advanced in the field. And so they're absolutely seeing this benefit, and it's there for companies to go grab if they want to. Now, despite all of that, we continue to see this phenomenon we call the responsible AI gap, in that there are many companies that have principles. In our survey, nearly 100%, but very few are taking tangible action, changing how product is built. You know, in our survey, a very small number of organizations actually have fully implemented responsible AI programs. And from our perspective, you know, the time for principles has passed. They're there, people have them. Now is the time for action. And so the question becomes, how do we bridge this gap? Now, in order to really do that, it's important to understand where is your starting point. And so what I want to do is just, you know, highlight a few of the results from our survey, just to give a better idea and help people start to think about this really important point of where are you starting from. So when we ran this survey, the first thing we did was ask respondents how they would assess their own maturity. And of all the respondents, 35% claimed to have a leading responsible AI program. We then asked a series of detailed questions to truly allow us to calculate and determine, you know, a maturity score to understand where they really were. So 35% claimed to be leading. What we found when we looked deeper is less than half of those actually were. And you know, this result you see here is for this group that claimed to be leading. The results actually hold across the full respondent group, where over half of them were overestimating their maturity. And it was actually quite shocking in that I expected to see people say, you know, this is a really hard area. I'm nowhere near as far advanced as I need to be. But in reality, what they're saying, they're thinking they're way further along than they actually are. And that's concerning because, you know, if you believe you have a fully mature program, you're not going to continue to invest, you're not going to continue to build. So there's this surprising false confidence in the level of maturity that organizations have. And then when we dug deeper, and this is showing you a view across the 7 different dimensions we analyzed, you know, similar, you know, the dots are the average maturity, the white boxes give you a sense of the variance. And there's things you would expect, like data and privacy are towards the top. There's, you know, been longstanding work on and regulation in this space. At the bottom, though, are the things that tend to be a little more complex and more difficult to implement, like fairness and equity, And one that was a little surprising for us is human plus AI, in that this is an area where we did some work with MIT, and we found companies that really focus on this learning between humans and AI systems realize five times the value from their AI. And so it's, from a business standpoint, really important, equally important from a responsible AI standpoint, yet it's clearly lagging behind. So the three big takeaways we walked away with from this survey: that there is real value at stake. You need to go capture it. And it's the motivation for many of the companies that are leading in this space, and ignoring it ignores a real source of value for companies. You also need to continue to invest and invest proactively to stay ahead. If you think about this 20% of companies that are already leading, for them to stay leading, they need to keep working on this as the space evolves, but also others need to invest pretty aggressively in order to realize that competitive advantage. And then the final and perhaps most important is being realistic about the starting point. We were really surprised by the overconfidence we saw. It's important to have a realistic view of where you are, understand your gaps, understand the strengths you can build on. So just sort of as you step back and think about where you are as an organization, keep these things in mind. They were sort of interesting insights that came out of our survey work. And the last piece I wanted to touch on is how to go from zero to responsible AI, if you will, right? And there is no single set of answers. There is no checklist. This is a complex space. But we have seen a lot of best practices and lessons learned that I thought I would share in how to mature a program. Now, the first thing is when we got the survey results back, we stepped back and actually did cluster analysis and said, what are the typical stepping stones along the journey? And what is the typical path we're seeing organizations take? And what we saw was these four key stages of maturity, from lagging to leading. And starting at the bottom at lagging, what we saw here was, often the company had principles in place, and they maybe done some work around privacy, security, but that's about it. Moving to the next developing stage, what we saw was this step function increase in fairness and equity in human plus AI. Not saying that they were where they needed to be, but it was interesting to see a strong focus in those areas and a big step function change. As they moved through advancing, it was sort of maturing all these different dimensions at about the same rate. And then that last leap into leading was again marked by a big jump in human plus AI, just giving a sense of how important that is as a topic area. And so that tended to be the journey that we saw organizations take, maturing along that path. But the question becomes, if you are somebody, and again, we saw about 20% of organizations in this leading bucket. The other 80% are in these other three stages. So the question, companies face is, how do I really make this journey? How do I move up through these stages? And so we stepped back and we thought a lot about this, and we codified a lot of our experience with our own program, with some of the other companies we work with, and developed these 6 steps organizations can take to mature. And I certainly will not touch on all, but 2 I thought I would hit. The first is this top one around empowering leadership. We think it's so important to name a single leader, a chief AI ethics officer, for example, that has accountability for responsible AI and is empowered to make change. And that duality is important, of both making sure they're accountable so that they're actually there driving the program, but also empowering them and giving them the authority to change engineering practices, to require different types of documentation. If you don't do those 2 things, we tend to see progress stall. And I would also share that, typically, while having a single point accountability is important, so is putting in place a multidisciplinary committee of some type that can inform the approach, can discuss some of the complex issues. And when we looked at leading companies, 70% of them had both an individually named leader, but also a committee behind them. And make sure you're resourcing a team. That's sort of the last piece of this point. A single person can only do so much. They need a team behind them. And so it's important to put resources behind this if you're really committed to making change. The other one I'll touch on is the bottom of this first column, putting governance in place. And this includes a variety of different elements. It's the roles and responsibilities, so making sure that everybody in the organization understands what is the expectations we have of them with regard to responsible AI, from the engineering team to the product managers to the business sponsors and leaders. So everyone understands what is their responsibility. You have a process to understand what is the AI even being built. And oftentimes that is a gap where there might be AI systems in play, yet people in the company don't even know that they're there. And then the last point, and perhaps the most important, is creating escalation paths. And I know it seems strange to say, put an escalation path in place to raise issues before you may be identifying issues. But what I've consistently seen is without some path for escalation to raise an issue, people won't raise the issue. And early on, you will find the way you find potential concerns with an AI product is from the teams themselves. So you need to give them that path to be able to raise concerns and say, hey, I'm worried about this product. Come help us think about it. So again, all 6 of these dimensions are important. It's not to say you'll get them all completely solved on day one. The trick is to make progress across all of them. But those 2 I highlighted are typically the first really powerful steps you can take to accelerate the journey. And I'll leave you with just sort of 3 parting thoughts to sort of summarize all this. I guess you could say the advice after having talked to a lot of different companies and executives in this space. The first piece is, the idea that developing principles is important, but it is not sufficient. It does not get you alone to responsible AI. You have to drive towards operationalizing those principles and changing how you build product. And you have to do that to bridge the gap. And frankly, if you don't, if you pause or delay at just having created principles, you risk falling into this ethics washing trap where it's all talk, no action, people get disillusioned, you lose momentum, and it can actually be worse for customer relations than if you had done nothing at all at times. So it's really important to continue that journey forward. The next piece is shift your mindset. Don't just look at this as a risk mitigation play. Think about the business potential and all the upside you can realize. That mind shift actually can and actually realize more value from their efforts. And then the last point is really understand where you're starting from. Certainly understand your gaps so you can fill them, but what are your strengths and build on them. And again, that's another trick to help you accelerate that journey, to understand where you really are in maturity, understand those strengths and amplify them as much as you can. So with that, I'll end there. If any of these topics are of interest to folks, here's just some resources so folks can read more if they're interested, and I'm happy to take any questions if you have them.
Thanks a lot, Steve. That was really great. And whatever the audience will come up to you, I would love definitely to have a one-to-one with you to emphasize on a few topics that we've heard about in our community. I think this is very an important thing. Culture change is key. And one of the most important thing is this global cooperation, working together with strong partners. You guys have such a vast experience. You see into so many corporates and companies where you can leverage and scale up the experience between those. And you mentioned a few things that I would like just to emphasize on before we go into the questions. One of the things that you said, it's very important that we have an escalation path in place. And we're always talking about it's an iterative process. Obviously, when you put something in place, when you develop an algorithm, even if it's not AI, it's very important that we do have an iterative process, that we learn from the mistakes. We have the mirror showing what doesn't work. And what we've heard from previous speakers also, it's very important to involve
you still have
everyone.
Me?
We do have. Can you hear me? Steve? I can see and hear you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me, Steve?
Yes.
Okay,
I can.
Great. Oh, perfect. I was able to hear you, but I think you didn't hear me. So I just summarized quickly what I said. Did you hear what I said with regards to the escalation path that needs to be in place, what you mentioned?
I didn't. I couldn't hear.
Okay, so at least I know where I stopped. This is about human intelligence and not AI. But one of the things that I always like is, especially to the question we had before, when AI gonna overcome or overpass the human intelligence? Forget it. We're still struggling with basic infrastructure problems. So talking about that, you mentioned that it's really important to put a process for escalation in place, and this is one of the such key things, that it's an iterative process involving everyone, learning by doing, and not only with AI, actually every algorithm that is being developed, everything that we are actually developing. So this is important also to integrate everyone, setting expectation management. You said so many very valuable things, that one of the things that I would love to, and this is one of the reasons why Swiss Cognitive exists, is this global cooperation. The companies and leaders have the chance to reach out to other companies who has the expertise and can leverage and can actually scale up what they've seen from other companies, and other can actually process much faster. So this is something that includes everyone, the whole ecosystem, and is what we are trying to empower. We do have questions from the panel. So one was, do you have any resources that you could provide to create a responsible AI program?
Well, I'm clearly biased. I shared some links to the information we have out there. You know, like I said, I'm clearly biased, but we've put a lot of resources out. Some of the other companies, like Microsoft, for example, has a lot of really good resources out there as well. So I kind of point you to those two places, at least as a start.
Oh, okay.
And I think I will also say, to the point you made, talk to other companies that are doing this. There is amazing learnings you can have. Everyone, you know, no one has this problem 100% solved. It's a rapidly evolving field. So talk to others and learn from each other is my other big piece of advice.
Thanks a lot. And talking not only about best practice, also worst failures, because there we can learn a lot.
Yes.
And this is also something that you mentioned, that a lot of companies have the principle in place, but actually tangible actions are lagging. How do you say that in English?
Lagging.
Thanks. So this is also something that I think it's important that we're not too shy to come and actually ask for support, because otherwise we're not able to push this process forward, and we're actually slowing down the innovation process. There is a lot of other questions, but unfortunately we have to go, or we can go to the next panel. So Stephen, again, thanks a lot. I'm looking very much forward to additional discussion with you, bringing you to discuss with our audience about your vast experience. This is what we want. Share for success. Take care and see you soon. Bye, Steve. So now we are coming to the next panel, the fundamentals and components of responsible AI. This is the topic of our next discussion, chaired by Jacques Ludig, our Swiss Cognitive Ambassador for the African continent and beyond. Jacques, you are a smart technology entrepreneur, AI expert, founder of multiple AI companies, author, AI ecosystem builder, and award-winning AI leader with 25 years experience, actually over 25 years experience in AI, machine learning, and data science and its application. You are currently founder and CEO of Cortex Group and Cortex Logistic as AI engine for business focused on providing scalable, ultra-personalized AI-enabled wellness solutions. And you're the founder and president of the Machine Intelligence Institute of Africa, focused on transforming Africa through AI. Your latest book is titled Democratizing AI to Benefit Everyone, what is exactly our topic. Policy intervention. Okay, good. This is another basic infrastructure problem. You guys, do you remember what batteries are? Hey, also they can run out of energy. So thanks for remaining with us. Yeah, actually, I was trying to welcome Ashley. As a recognized leader in the social tech community, you have developed workable governance for data, AI, and open source tools. Your work and ability to bring experts together to solve important challenges has led to meaningful change in government and helps to inform policymakers, industries, and academic research. With you on the panel, we have Tom. Tom, you studied literature and philosophy with focus on culture, anthropology, and has a deep knowledge of new technologies such as AI. After 20 years in tech companies, Thomas, you recognize human behaviors weigh more than ever in history. Why? Because of the rise of AI, because of the need to understand our own biases as humans, and because of the need to act responsible towards life itself. Being with one of the world's leading provider of AI technology, you get to know dozens of use cases and like to share your knowledge at various occasions, such as Swiss Cognitive and also American Chamber of Commerce. You're also a well-known guest at AI Podcast, so reach out to him if you need someone for your podcast. With you on stage, we do have my friend Franziska-J. You are a leading scholar of the social and political implication of distributed ledger technologies and artificial intelligence. Your hands-on digital executive, game changer, and digital strategies, having led digital programs across almost all sectors worldwide. With deep interdisciplinary knowledge and with changing roles between strategy and executions. Your passions lies in building ethical and sustainable solutions from social recognition and rewards to collective knowledge implication of AI. In your private life, you are a grafter building lamps of wood and stones. And I tell you, I'm still waiting for my lamp. Then we do have Danilo. Danilo is an award-winning thought leader, coach, author, and keynote speaker in the topic of automation, AI, RPA, machine learning, digital transformation, and innovation. Danilo, you have been featured in the Times newspaper, Bloomberg, Infomoney, AR Journal, AI Magazine, Business Chief Technology Magazine, Computer Weekly, and other leading publications. So, Tom, Alan, with the AI Journal, I think you guys need to have a discussion together. Saying that, I would like to hand over to Jacques.
Thank you. Thanks, Delith. Delith, can you hear me? Delith, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks very much for that introduction. We've got an illustrious panel here, as you can see from that wonderful descriptions and bios that Delith has provided. It's an honor to be here. I do believe that responsible AI is an imperative. It's crucially important, and it's been a wonderful conference so far. So let's dig into it. Before I get into the specific themes that we're going to discuss as a panel, I just want to also mention my massive transformative purpose is around how to shape a better future in the smart technology era, and how can we let people and society thrive. And responsible AI, trustworthy AI, is absolutely critical to actually achieve that. And that's why I also reference this. I've got a chapter dedicated to this in my book as well, Democratizing AI to Benefit Everyone. What I really like about the panelists here, we're going to get a very interesting perspective because it's the European Commission. We're going to get the governance aspects. We're very fortunate to have that perspective, but we're also going to have practical. We're going to talk about some specific examples. We can talk about AI vendors and specific use cases. So looking forward to Franziska and Thomas digging into that as well. and then Ashley also representing, talking about responsible AI, part of the, well, Responsible AI Institute. Looking forward to her initiatives. So very quickly, in terms of we've talked about, I think during the day, there's been discussions around what is the framework for trustworthy AI, and we know that the European Union was kind of leading in that regard with the framework around that. And they define also, obviously, ethical AI, lawful AI, and robust AI as a subset of that. So my first question is really going to be around, it's going to be to Danilo, and we're going to open it up. So we're going to just talk about the principles, and also then we're going to talk about the risks, the risk aspect of that. I know that is getting quite a bit of attention. So Danilo, so how do you think about responsible AI or ethical AI? What is the difference in your mind?
I think ethical AI is one of those difficult topics where what ethics lens are you applying? If you get 100 people in the room with different backgrounds, they're all going to give you a different answer of what's ethical or not. Which is why certain topics like euthanasia is never ending. Just like the topic of ethical AI is also never ending.
Yes.
And I think we recognize that in the EU. I've had discussions like that also with different governments around the world. And again, depending which government you talk to, it's a totally different approach. And I'm sure we're going to get into this later with how the Chinese government look at AI and how the American government look at AI and Europe as well.
Yeah.
But responsible AI is something a little bit easier to agree on. It's something that one day, I am hopeful that there will be a universal framework, which is agreed. Of course, it's going to be regional at first, but using it responsibly is, yes, there is morals and there is questions of doing right and wrong, black and white, and there's going to be always gray areas there. But responsible AI, I think, is a lot easier to agree on than ethical AI. There's also the other aspect of, for commercial gain versus doing things right for your population, etc. Sometimes for you to go a little bit faster, you have to, and you're doing something completely, new and revolutionary, there are certain rules that you might need to break in order to get there faster. So it's always a balancing act as well between, do I make some people uncomfortable but get there faster? Or do we make sure that we absolutely get everybody on board on the same page in terms of, is it ethical and, is it responsible before we make every move and do that to the detriment of, technological advancement? So every region you go to, every government you go to have a different answer, sometimes a completely different answer. That's been my experience so far.
Yeah, and maybe just quickly on that, it was quite interesting to you being a member of the European Union as well, specifically Commission and the AI Alliance. If you look at the 4 principles, they talk about respect of human autonomy and prevention of harm and fairness and explicability. And it was quite interesting for me to look at Oxford's Digital Ethics Lab that's got obviously aligned with that, but then they talk about beneficence and non-maleficence specifically on that side as well. So I think that was quite interesting for me. So Franziska, just quickly from I know given your Microsoft background, and I know with Microsoft specifically also part of the partnership on AI, there's also the 6 principles of responsible AI and so forth. What is your take also on the ethical side of things, just commenting on what Danilo was just saying? And then also, I think you want to comment on the risk side of things as well. Oh, you're mute. You're mute. You're mute. You're muted.
I'm still on.
There we go.
Thank you. I believe it's for us as involved companies or even governments, right? It's very hard. We cannot be the sole entity to govern the moral principles of AI, which would be for me ethical, and would like to give this also over to Thomas, who has studied philosophy. And I think this is more a philosophy question. I believe that we really must find a way to govern those principles and standards among each other, as this is our responsibility. But going back to the principles or the EU regulations that have been published on 21st of April, the beauty of them are that they have incorporated those principles and standards of about 150 different companies worldwide, brought them together and have built a risk-based approach, right? So they start with unacceptable risks. So everything that threats safety, livelihoods of people will be banned. For instance, everything that manipulates human behavior or anything that goes towards social scoring by governments, which specific countries do, right? This, for instance, integrates the principles of accountability, which then fulfills the ethical standards and requires a proper governance framework. And you have high-risk AI solutions, for instance, everything around employee and worker safety, critical infrastructures. So when it comes to, let's say, technology unfriendly environments such as construction sites, and then you have integrated the principle reliability and safety, privacy and security, and so forth. And don't want to deep dive because it's still a draft, but I think that's very beautiful that we have built this already in April this year.
No, that's fantastic. The way I'm looking at the world, if you look at all the AI use cases, I've been my whole career in AI and applications, is consumer-facing side. You can see clearly, if you look at the regulation, the key requirements for trustworthy AI, a bunch of them: privacy, data governance, transparency, diversity, and fairness. So many things cover the consumer side, dealing with people's data. But as you say, the robustness, the technical robustness, the safety side, the industrial side of use cases, that's absolutely crucial. And it's almost like we are on this man-machine intelligence continuum, going from assisted, augmented to autonomous AI, and we see more augmented and autonomous. So huge responsibility to make sure that those systems are working fine. So yeah, fantastic. So Thomas, Franziska just mentioned that some of the things that you're also involved in. So I would just like to, do you see, is it a competitive advantage, ethical, responsible AI? How do you think about it? I know you've got a philosophical slant as well.
I may have to fight my philosophical background now, because it's interesting to see this through this lens and to discuss the difference between man and machine and find the differences. But honestly, our customers are more interested in what are they allowed to do, so the kind of the obvious regulations, what they should do, is kind of the ethical implications, and what the concrete project is about. So is this what they are wanting to implement right now? Is this possible or not? As simple as it is. And as clearer we find all those regulations, and even if there are, in addition to that, the same across huge regions, made Europe, made even the world, it might be even better for our global customers, so they don't have to stick to national limitations, and they can really roll out their projects. And SAS as a company, we have a lot of experience in the financial services sector. Banks and insurance companies are our customers for a long time across the world. And this is a regulated environment anyway. So we are used to deal with limitations. There is a data mining regulation for a long time, and we do have risk regulations for credit scoring, whatever. So there is already some basis and some understanding already there. Development based on that to be even more kind of to implement more automated processes, which is the actual benefit of AI in the economy.
Absolutely. That brings me to Ashley as well. Ashley, I would love to talk about why does AI need to be governed, but before I get to that question, you can cover that now. It's just quickly your perspective, given your experiences also, I know in Canada, around AI, the risks, the principles, and so forth. Do you want to quickly comment on that? Oh, you're also on mute.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So I think that it's great to see what's happened with the proposed AI Act from the EU, and that it's really, as Franziska said, bringing together all of those, both corporate principles, but then a lot of work that institutes had done from an academic perspective, but civil society organizations have been advocating for as well, and culminating into one comprehensive document. I'd like to think that inspiration for that risk base was based partly in what we were able to implement with the Directive on Automated Decision-Making Systems from the Government of Canada's perspective. Really starting to think about how to actually assess what types of AI systems exist and the risk that they have. I do agree with this idea of bucketing kind of the things that are the most high risk and have the most potential harm to humans or the planet. However, I think that there's, as we'll get into more detail around these principles and how we govern it, a need to really think in a nuanced way, what does that harm actually mean and to what extent? And so there is a need to do a more rigorous assessment against what that risk base is. And so again, that was some of the work that we did start in the Government of Canada context with the Augmented Impact Assessment. That's part of the directive. And one of the things just in this discussion of ethics versus responsibility, we really did start to think about how AI systems needed to be governed in an ethical manner. And Global Affairs Canada was like, whoa, 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 we cannot impose our morals and our values as a country, as Danilo was saying earlier, on others. And so the idea of responsible based in human rights and that going back to sustainable development goals was really something that we integrated then into the rest of the work that we did. So I just then to transition from that into just broader governance, there's the role that institutions like the EU Commission's playing in proposing this legislation. But also I see there being a strong need for private governance to help to augment and complement that. And the proposed AI Act does actually speak to that as well with the need for these conformity assessments. And so this idea of really trying to understand how to integrate standards that are nuanced and specific enough so that going back to some of these themes that Franziska brought up of companies regulating themselves and really checking their own homework, there's more checks and balances that are put in place, but that really needs to come together because a policy of that magnitude is way too significant. You really need to break that down. And so that's where I see a complement of things like certification programs, which is what we're leading at the Responsible AI Institute.
Fantastic. Thanks for that. Danilo, just what is your thoughts on what role do and should governments play in regulating AI? You also mentioned East, West. We also, obviously, countries got different approaches. I'm based here in Cape Town, South Africa. Africa's got their own perspectives in dealing with these kind of things as well. What do you think? How should governments play? What's the specific role?
Again, to answer that kind of question, if I was Asian, I would give you a completely different answer. My personal thought on this is that for now, while we're still feeling this out and understanding it, it's okay to have companies go in front of governments and show us what's possible. But as is coined by McKinsey and PwC and many others, at some point, very soon, AI is going to become the single most effective commercial and revolutionary opportunity in the world today. It already is, but it hasn't materialized yet. So I think governments at the moment are doing. A lot of people blame different governments for being too slow on this. They're not doing enough. I can see why that is the case. They do have other things that they're doing as well, which they're very busy on. There's also a lack of education. So until the government catches up, until they hire the right people to advise them properly, to be ministers who understand this stuff very well, they should stay the way they're staying, which is gradually building up to a framework, regulatory framework. But until they are better equipped and they have better understanding of this within the actual government themselves, they should stay as they are. In my personal opinion, let the private sector go ahead and do its thing. But hopefully, the next 2 years maximum, start coming up with a very, well put together framework, a regulatory body around AI. And then my hope is that a couple of years from that onwards there is a global framework that starts being put into place once there's greater understanding and greater education around this topic, especially on the government side.
Absolutely. I think we have got to have a step-by-step approach. As humanity, we haven't done this before. So we have to be smart. And for me, it's collective sense making, understand different perspective, cultures, opinions, philosophies. I even, in my book, talk about the meaning of life in the 21st century as well. And it's important to understand that as well, that kind of perspective, bring that in. Franziska, how do you suggest we establish governance to make sure that those standards and principles are being followed? I know you're going to provide us more from a Microsoft tech giant perspective, but there's a very important perspective on that as well.
Well, I believe it's really about everything that we have spoken the last 2.5 hours already. It's really something that cannot be done by one sole entity. It cannot be done by the government. It must be done in conclusion with all the companies involved producing such solutions. And for me, it really starts in the beautiful mindset of the developer already, you know, that's developing the code, because it all starts here. And to guide it, I even believe if you would find a way how data is able to govern itself, this would be a solution. I mean, it could be a solution. Another way, I mean, could be even blockchain technology that can enable democratization as a moral aspect of AI. So if an algorithm does not holistically follow the ethical rules defined, so the Asimov's laws, for instance, which are for robotics, the block to continue the calculations will not be valid, and a chain reaction would be then to delete those blocks, right? And this could be one approach. I mean, and then if, I don't know, quantum is coming, things will change again. So that's, I think it's very hard to say that. We all need to do that together. And that's everything we have spoken today. MIIA spoke about it before in the first panel. We need to find a way to bring all of us that produce solutions, that apply solutions, that regulate solutions to work together. That's and then it comes down to the global framework that Danilo was mentioning, right? I mean, that's not that easy.
And I think what makes it not, well, you're talking about not making it easy, but what complicates things further is that I think as humans, we categorize things. This is AI, not all the rules around that. But in fact, we're looking at a fusion of smart technologies, and we've got AI and blockchain and IoT and quantum, and all of these things interplay. There's biotech, nanotech, all of it. And that complicates things because there's going to be very interesting applications, and we need to be very quick and agile in how we handle this. And it's like a runaway train. So,
at least we could start with something. I mean, Thomas, you wanted to go ahead. Thomas.
Yeah, just to maybe add on this.
Yes, go for it, Thomas.
And not only regulators are the one who drive kind of a trust-building initiative. We all need our customers accept the technology, and so the customers of our customers have to be able to explain what they do with that. And this is a reputational risk already for everyone in this chain, starting from the vendor to the customer of us and to the end user as a service provider. So we have a kind of natural ambition to stick with the, let's call it ethical or responsible AI rules we all have in our kind of culture. And if you see now all these regulations, Franziska mentioned all these, or Danilo, with all the privately built AI ethical guidelines, they come out of a certain culture, and this culture is more and more a competitive advantage. If you want a customer to buy from you, you have to tell them why from you. Are you on my side? Do you belong to the good or to the bad? And everyone wants to stay with the good, and so there is a driving force behind which even is ahead of regulation.
Absolutely. I want to actually ask you about, I was asked think about certification regulation, but you talked about financial services and you just referenced that as well. I actually want to get into the last section here. The theme here is more practical things. So we talk about some examples of how AI vendors can contribute to responsible AI and some client examples as well. But before we get into that, Ashley, if you can comment on what do organizations need to do to be prepared for AI governance, but also just to implement trustworthy, responsible AI.
Thanks. Yeah, and I want to just go back to one of the points that was made earlier, in that there's going to be so much change that's required because we have blockchain and IoT and everything. And one of the things that was really quite interesting when we were doing the directive is that the rules are the same independent of what the technology is. For the most part, there's definitely a delta when it comes to systems that are learning with the expansiveness of and connectedness of IoT. There's going to be implications there. But I don't think that we should make it more complicated than it needs to be. It sounds like something that we really need to be scared of. And what does explainability mean? What does robustness mean? And how do I add that to my practice? There's a lot of security measures and parameters that are already in place that have accounted for a lot of this. And so I would say where organizations are not already doing good technology governance, you should be doing that. That's going to solve a lot of your problems. But also because of the nature of AI systems are more of a socio-technology, then also not just think about technology governance, but your entire enterprise governance. And so how does your communications planning fit into it? How does your product management fit into it? All of these different types of pieces are already things that you should be doing. So to the question then of what organizations should be doing and thinking about, those are already a big aspect of that. As already mentioned, robustness, so making sure that there's accuracy within the systems, that it's achieving what you want it to achieve. I think one of the things, obviously explainability comes up lots and it's been mentioned lots today, so I won't get into the obvious ones, but ongoing monitoring of the systems is something that's incredibly important, especially as there's these learning aspects to it. So those are the different types of things that I think there's lots that's already been written on this. Just getting to figure out how this fits into your existing governance is what I would recommend.
Danilo, thank you very much, Ashley. Comments?
Yeah, I see actually a pretty big systematic tsunami wave coming. So, like if you go interview, all the ministers in each of the countries around the world and ask them what is blockchain, what is quantum computing, what is AI. I'm pretty confident that most of them wouldn't have a clue. And so this is going to get driven by the private sector. Big companies, tech companies are going to teach governments what they should be doing. So, especially on the West, in the East and China is not the case. There needs to be a generational shift. So all the people in government today, the things have been taught at school, the things that they've been learning in business school, the courses they've been on, none of this stuff is covered in their education system. They go and talk to consultants who explain to them all these things, but they have other things in their hands. They're trying to feed starving countries and deal with COVID and all this other stuff. So either something really bad needs to happen so that governments really wake up. So either a disaster needs to happen, or mass unemployment needs to take place eventually. It won't happen overnight, but eventually it will be the case. A number of things need to come into play so that governments really step up and pay attention to this. Governments in general, some governments do better than others. But it's just, there's a lot of wrong recipes in this book to make a pretty bad cake. So there needs to be a bit of a new order that comes in to set things straight. A gradual change here and there won't make it.
You're right.
Something systematic has to change in the system for it to get better and for these things that we're talking about to be achieved.
Danilo and I wish that we would be bold enough. That's what we need, some good examples, some leadership, visionary leadership and execution from certain countries, from organizations to help, because we don't want to be caught unaware or really sit with a massive problem and now suddenly we can do it better. We can. We thought we were talking about these kind of things. We've got only a few minutes left now. I just want to, Francisco, if everybody can just quickly talk about just concrete examples, specifically, Francisco, most important client examples you would point out with regard to responsible AI,
Sure.
also connecting sustainability.
Quickly, I see we have also 1.5 minutes only, so I would like to go back to the point from Ashley, which is a little bit more, don't be afraid of AI, because AI also supposed to make fun, right?
True.
And what we are doing at Microsoft, especially also focusing on really tackling the UN Sustainability and Development Goals. So, we have beautiful 17 goals, right? So it's all about reducing plastic, for instance. If you find a way to do that, you solve so big problems, and reduce CO2 footprint and so forth. Just one beautiful example. In Norway, we built a solution which is able to avoid overfishing of salmon. Just, plugging in cognitive services, plugged in AI and really monitoring the salmons, how big they are, what size they are, and then fish them when they are the right size. So avoid overfishing. Just one beautiful little example how you can do that. And other ways we are basically focusing on is basically, for instance, making construction sites more safe. Predictive maintenance, again with IoT, Ashley mentioned it before, yeah, and making sure that people in technology unfriendly environments are able to build, for instance, trains or buildings and those kind of things. And we could look into more in depth on those sustainability and development goals and start here. Applying responsible and ethical AI is for all of us, training is for all of us in education, and we will do good for the world. And each company has to tackle those goals by 2030. So that's my last point.
Absolutely. Thomas, just last seconds. Do you want to comment on that? Because I know you've got some practical things as well, perspectives on this as well.
Yeah, there could be a bunch of examples, but we are deeply in the medical area now, healthcare, public health, COVID fighting, drug development. This is already kind of a heavy influential field, and from an ethical perspective, already kind of a tricky one to be to make it right. So, but this we saw a huge increase there, and we saw that the acceptance from our customers is higher when we can explain what actually is combined and how it comes to these predictions and stuff like that. So it's crucial for us to stay on top of this discussion.
Yeah, fantastic. It was fantastic talking to you all. I've got actually a bunch of other questions that I would love to offline talk to you guys about, each one of you. Thank you for your wonderful inputs. Really appreciate. Over to Daleth.
Thanks a lot. First of all, Jacques, when you reach out to these guys discussing more questions, please include me.
Okay, will do.
Again, thanks a lot. I don't know, I'm just thrilled about listening to that. And I just thought before, you know, we doing this CognitiveVirtual since March last year because of COVID. Obviously, we, like all the others, needed to change to virtual. And I'm still astonished about how many new things we can learn from so many different people coming from different cultures, different countries, different corporate startups. I can't say I'm speechless because I'm speaking all the time, but I would say now I'm speechless about all the great insights we're getting from you guys. Thanks a lot. I do have actually a question, and as you, Jacques, are an AI thought leader by yourself, I would like actually to bring this to you. As most AI is international, do you think that there should be an international framework or standard?
Yeah, I think there should be. We're kind of part of one global society. We've created a nervous system society with the internet. With blockchain, we've got abilities to create decentralized systems, but all connected, and all of it. I really think as a humanity, if we think about the problems that we need to address, climate change, and you think about all these big problems around technology as well, lethal autonomous weapons, all of these kind of things, you just can't do this within just countries and in an isolated way. So we have to work together as humanity, as a society, and I do comment a lot on that specifically. And as Danilo also mentioned, I think there's some really wisdom and really good perspectives from different countries. We need to understand one another. We need to collaborate a lot more. So that's why I think European Union, just the fact that you're involved with a lot of different countries, you can set an example of how to communicate and how to sort things out. But we need to have the West and the East, everybody getting together on this. So I think we need to work towards that. Even in my book, I talk about a massive transformative purpose for humanity, and specific goals that complement the United Nations goals. So I'm a big believer in working together, collective sense making, and so forth. And it sounded like the panel has got similar kind of perspectives on that. I would love to hear their perspectives as well.
Great. Thanks a lot. Yeah, and I think one of the things that also has been mentioned, I think it was from you, Danilo, is about how important the education is on the different levels. And this leads me to the next keynote. So thank you, Jacques, Ashley, Thomas, Franziska, and Danilo for this fruitful insight. Dear audience, feel free again to connect with them on social media and exchange. These are people who are able to support you wherever you are. Thanks again, and see you hopefully very, very soon.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Welcome. Yeah, wow. It's already time for our grande finale with Thomas Davin, 21 years in UNICEF, yet you are still indefatigable about finding ways to empower children to reach their true potential in the main solution to many of the world's current challenges. Now, as the new Global Innovation Director, you and your team focus on spotting innovations that offer transformational potential for children, from data science to AI, machine learning, blockchain, to product innovations to be picked up and used. To that, together, we create global social goods that advance humanity. Dear Thomas, I'm thrilled having you with us, inspiring our audience with your final keynote. The stage is all yours.
Thank you so much, Dalit. I just want to check that the sound is good. You can hear me well? Wonderful. So first, I want to congratulate you, Dalit, and the team for bringing together such an amazing moment. I have to say, I've been trying to follow mostly throughout, and it's been incredible. The speakers, the substance that comes out of that has been just magnificent, and so many insights and thought-provoking points have come out of that. I don't really think I have a whole lot to add, but let me try to still give it a go, because now I have the floor. I also want to maybe start by saying I would approach this very much from a position of humility. Contrary to brilliant speakers, I am not an AI specialist. I have not devoted the last 2 decades of my life really focusing on this. Part of what we try to focus is really, the technology and the potential impact on creating global social goods for children. And so that's really the kind of the position I'll take, and that's where I start. So hopefully the audience will find some of these thoughts equally thought-provoking. So first, why is that important to think of AI? Mainly because from our perspective, AI is very soon going to be ubiquitous, and it's going to impact our world in ways that we probably are not really thinking of yet. And indeed, it already is. And maybe to just take one example, if I think of just Google and the impact it has on children and the future of children, right? On the one hand, the very positive thing is that it's changing education and the education sector, for instance. And many children today tell you, I want my school to challenge my brain in ways that allow me to use knowledge or query knowledge, or be challenged in finding knowledge in ways that I can't Google it, right? And when I grew up, you had to learn many things by rote because you just had to get it into your mind. So nowadays, things are completely outdated for millions of children, billions of children, and that is to be celebrated. And that is really amazing. That's just one of the outcomes of that use case. The other use case is equally, many of the same children are saying, why do I need to learn another language, for instance? In a few years, many of these AI will just translate anything for me. And that's probably true. Or why do I need to learn grammar or orthograph? Because machines will correct for me when I write anything. And that's probably true. But we don't know really the impact of not learning this on children's brains. We don't know what that will mean in terms of their ability to adapt to life, in terms of adapting to situations. And so that for me is also, and for UNICEF, is also one of the elements that we need to anticipate and really query and question and reflect on the impact of AI on our societies at large. And that is why I'm so happy to be here with you today. I'll speak of maybe 4 points. First, the potential of AI for children. Second, AI for who? Then maybe some ideas of potential solutions around bridging the digital divide that at least exists from a UNICEF perspective. And then I'll end with some reflections on longer term thinking. But the first one, I want to really start by saying, and from a UNICEF perspective, and certainly from the innovation division perspective from UNICEF, we are huge believers in the potential for AI to create global social goods and to really help revolutionize a number of elements and that offer children the potential to thrive. And really just, if you think of access to digital healthcare and the swiftness by which we were able to develop vaccines around COVID, is one of the obvious use cases, but it's certainly not the only one. When you think of the potential of, again, AI around the revolution that is, I believe, happening today in the education sector, and we are only seeing the beginning of this, but I'm one of the firm believers that in 10 years, maybe 15 years down the line, the education sectors will look nothing like what it is today. And that is an education sector that has moved very little over the last 150 years. So it will be a massive revolution and largely a very positive one. Similarly, we believe there's massive potential around using AI to undertake and foster and support a potential seismic shift in social protection, for instance, and how we are protecting the most vulnerable in real time, how we are monitoring those who are most vulnerable in our societies, how we are making sure that they receive the means to survive, to evolve, and also to measure the impact of social protection schemes on their lives and on their protection. Essentially, we have the potential to shift the social contract in the world in ways that we didn't have before. So all of these are just simple use cases that impact on children and on vulnerable children in particular. And so for us, we are very much a proponent, a believer that AI is a force for good. We just need to frame it and make it as such. And maybe there are a number of challenges that we would submit need to be reflected as well. And the first one would be AI for who? When we think of the world, maybe a few years ago, we were looking at, where are the developers of AI and really who do they serve? And it's quite clear to everyone that there are about, say, 400 to 500,000 AI engineers worldwide. The immense majority of whom are in developed economies. And even those coming from the global south tend to migrate to the global north because that is simply where the money is. The needs for these capabilities is really mostly happening in the global north right now. And so we really have a technology that is currently being used and being developed really in one portion of the world largely. And that is a bit of a problem because when we look at the technology of AI evolves, functions, is effective based on data sets. We all know that that's how it evolves and that's how it gets better and better at predictions. Yet these data sets are actually largely global north data sets. They tend to be rich world data sets because of course the global north is much better connected than the global south. We have, in terms of access to smartphones and technology, a huge divide between the global north and the global south. Even in the global south, those who are connected, again, that divide is reflected. Those who are connected in the global south tend to be a part of the 20% that are the best off, the better off. And so again, even there, that access to technology and the way that data is produced and by whom is it produced is impacting very differently on the ability for AI to learn. And so part of what we would posit is that we need to be really careful about what that means for us as a society, for us as world, because we need that AI to work for everyone. And because the data currently is really coming from the rich people, then it is working on assumptions, on ways of life and culture that are being used by rich people. And we need to make sure that we don't leave behind a whole half of the world around how effective these technologies and these solutions are going to be for everyone. What does it mean in terms of solutions? There's a number of things that we are working on. One is really thinking of policy and what could be policy for AI around children. And we've developed a policy framework with the government of Finland that could be quite interesting. We're also using essentially an innovation funding venture fund to work on AI solutions in the global south to understand how that technology can be applied and what kind of leverages it can have on children's solutions, on children's future. And we're working with lots of partners around the notion of digital public goods, essentially positing that we need to look at some of these technologies and its impact as a global social goods and not just as an individual company particular good. And so that's something that is quite important to define how we will together frame how this technology affects all children in the world. Let me land on maybe one last point, which is how do we think long term? Again, because of AI soon to be ubiquitous system, and maybe a few quick thoughts that I would like to offer to the audience. First, around the notion of global governance, that for us really requirements, and we've heard a lot of the progress around the EU. We believe that's the exact right place to start, and we need to keep developing this to a global framework of governance that we all are comfortable around where we're going and how we frame this. We would also suggest that that applies very much to single companies. We've heard so many good examples around Microsoft and many others developing their own systems, and we would submit that that should apply to any given enterprise and stakeholders, whether they are for-profit or non-profit, around reflection on how these systems, how these technologies will apply to themselves and the kind of consequences they will have to be. The third point is really that notion of independence of use, test, review of the use cases of the technology. We really need to make sure that we have committees that are focusing on responsible use cases and their implications that are distinct from business owners, or at least that those that will drive business decisions. That is quite important because these implications, again, as I try to initiate in my interventions, are sometimes unintended or unimagined. Similarly, nobody really thought about the impact of social media on children's ability, for instance, right now to struggle to really focus on a long term, partly because most of their social media are such short-term use cases. And it has implications on their ability of children to grow and the brain functions and how these brains are now being used and will be shaped as adults. Maybe a suggestion might be also for companies to reflect on whether we should look at the notion of capping revenues stemming from such technologies, similarly to what the OpenAI is doing, or maybe capping preferences and priorities that the technology should maybe help us reflect on. In other words, if the solution is going to give a business revenue that is very profitable to the company, but may have negative implications in terms of society that may be maybe longer term, who makes the decision, who makes that call whether we move forward or not? And we believe that those calls, those framework are quite important and need to be really reflected on with an intentionality. And that intentionality is maybe something that we believe is the most important, and the humility of how we look at that technology for the future. Partly because, as we know, many of the most advanced AIs are currently being hard to understand how they make predictions. So that notion of explainability, that transparency is quite important. We need to be able to query each and every time how that prediction has been arrived to, that decision has been arrived to by the technology, and being able to challenge that for biases, and to possibly review the algorithm that are shaping, including when those review will potentially hurt the bottom line, the business bottom line. So that notion of intentionality, of consequences, the notion of really thinking beyond a particular sector and looking at cross-sector applications and implications of the use of technology on society are quite important, and will need really that intentionality of engagement from business and people who are outside of the business sectors, or at least within the same company outside of KPIs of revenue making. Maybe two last points. One is that we also are very much convinced that this is really the potential to move forward should be a union of both worlds, AI and the human element. This is how we move forward together, and this is how we'll get the best results. And neither one should have preeminence. If anything, the human elements should have always preeminence. And AI is a game changer, and that we should shape that game changer to benefit the whole world and not just one part of the world. And that will only happen with that continued intentionality around the balance of how that AI is applied to us, is applied to others, is applied to all societies. Thank you very much.
A great applause to you, Thomas. Thanks for this insightful closing speech. And you mentioned right at the beginning that you're actually not an AI thought leader, expert with vast experience. But isn't it exactly that what makes this topic so strong, and what shows us again how important it is to have such a variety, diversity in the teams. We're always talking about thinking out of the box. And it's probably one of the most difficult things to think out of the box if you sit in the box. So we should actually let other people to think out of to actually tell us and share their experience, their use cases, and we can then adapt them to our industries, to our projects. So we just let them thinking out of the box and thinking of you being an innovation leader. I think this is exactly the essence to it. We need to have people with different core competences. And you are actually one of them who are leading this innovation or enabling also people who has a strong tech background to empower the potential of the technology. So I think it's not only what we're always talking about, machine and the human being, it's also actually interacting with all the human beings in this world. So thanks a lot. I will definitely stay in contact with you discussing more, and we're gonna have after summer break another session about AI and education, where we definitely going to reach out to you and to your team again, and hopefully have you guys with us again. Thomas, it was my great pleasure having a person like you for the final keynote. Take care and see you soon.
Thank you for having me.
Now, unfortunately, time is over again, and it passes so fast. This is normally what happens when the content is so exciting. Thanks a lot to all of you. I put some notes down, but there are so many things that actually I'm not so sure where to start. But there have been a few questions that made me think a little bit still where we stand. One of it was like whether AI gonna overpass the human being, our intelligence. One was, how can we make sure that artificial intelligence is not making the human being redundant? Like really basic stuff that I think people are still thinking about these questions. Please reach out. We'll be more than happy to discuss with you, to explain a lot. And I just want to share one little example with you that I just read last week that shows a little bit where we stand. Although, and we heard a lot about the potential of AI, how many great things we're doing within the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN, within healthcare, how to support the human being in health, in safety, and still, and one of the speakers said, AI is still kind of silly. It's difficult for an algorithm to have common sense. And the article that I read was actually one sentence saying, a man entered the restaurant, ordered a steak, and left a big tip. Now, for us human beings, it's very evident what happened. We're going into a restaurant because we're hungry or because we have a date. We are ordering something. After that, we're going to eat it. After that, we're going to pay. We leave a tip and we go out. But an algorithm doesn't have such an obvious common sense. So if we're just thinking about the effort that we need to put into for an algorithm to learn that, it's a huge, huge iterative process. How algorithm learns such trivial things. And this just brings me to one thing that I would like to share with you before we finalize. My personal thought about the expression artificial intelligence is really much misleading, because if we're talking about artificial plants, joints, organs, even jewelries, we always think about it needs to be as accurate, as natural as possible. But if we talk about artificial intelligence, I'm not looking to copy the human brain. This is not what we're seeking to. And we've heard a lot about that, how much we can actually do with this really great technology to support the human being. It's here for us and not against us. And therefore, responsible AI is a very so to say, like very significant part that we need to be aware of. And we will definitely going to discuss more about that in the future. Now, I would like to share with you the date for the next CognitiveVirtual. We will have one more before summer break taking place 6th July. As AI makes more decisions, the nature of leadership will change. Again, we, the human being, are being challenged, and it's up to us to challenge technology. If you are an expert, and if you would like to share your expertise, knowledge, and experience with our global community, please reach out to us. We're always looking for great speakers with insightful information for the audience, because we are only as good as you are. And I'm only as good as my team, and especially my co-founder, Andy. And I just want to say thanks to Andy, thanks to the team for making this happen and running after batteries if I run out of battery. Thanks a lot. Stay safe and see you in a month's time.
Bye-bye. Have a good time.